Chapter 341, Ice Escape. The fire dragon hurtled past the ice dragon's flank, an impressive display that left Shuifeng unscathed. Nathan didn't flinch. He'd only unleashed that blazing beast to force the ice dragon to veer off course and keep it from tearing the passenger ship beneath them apart. With a steadying breath, he launched himself off the deck and darted away, twisting through the air until he found himself above a deserted stretch of sea. No vessels, no mist shinobi, no Konoha operatives, just Nathan and Shuifeng and the monsters they commanded. Sensing his rival's intention, Shuifeng tightened his grip on the reins and signaled the ice dragon to strike. The colossal beast lunged, its frosty claws slicing through the salt air. Nathan rolled aside, narrowly evading the snap of ice-sharp talons. The dragon's next swipe gouged the water's surface, sending waves crashing outward and rocking Nathan off balance. Shuifeng's eyes gleamed with anticipation at the disruption. With a subtle motion, he urged the ice dragon in for another assault, its heavy form pawing at the sea like a predator stalking its prey. Nathan leaped backward just in time, the dragon's claws raking empty air. Relentless, Shuifeng commanded successive attacks, icy jaws, sweeping tails, and hammering claws, all designed to trap Nathan on the open water. Yet Nathan met each assault with fluid evasions, ducking, weaving, and staying one step ahead. The vast, lonely sea had become their arena, a battlefield of fire and ice where only one would emerge victorious. Nathan skidded back, forced once more to yield ground, as Shuifeng shifted his handprint. The ice dragon reared, its jaws stretching wide, and unleashed a blast of cold so fierce that even the fire dragon's ordeal paled in comparison. A swirling wall of white mist roared toward Nathan, the fabled dragon's breath, capable of freezing flesh in an instant. Anyone caught in its path would be encased in ice, robbed of movement, and quite possibly life itself. Yet instead of panic, Nathan felt a thrill. He'd watched closely when Shuifeng used his fire escape dragon fire technique. Each time the dragon spewed its elemental breath, Shuifeng's own body tensed, momentarily locking him in place. If his observation was correct, this would be his chance. Sure enough, as the dragon's frosty torrent poured forward, its massive form stiffened with exertion. Nathan seized the moment. With a crisp clang, he drew his long sword. Its blade flickered green in the dim light as he executed the instant sword technique. In one fluid motion, he lunged forward and stepped clear of the dragon's frozen maelstrom, just beyond the edge of its deadly cold. Nathan lifted his left hand, whirring the chakra seals in an instant, and unleashed his ninjutsu, fire style, great fireball technique. A roaring inferno burst from his mouth, coalescing mid-flight into a colossal fireball. It hurtled straight toward Shuifeng's ice crystal dragon. Shuifeng's eyes widened at the approaching blaze and the searing heat rippling through the air. He yanked control of his ice dragon, desperately steering it aside, only to discover, too late, that Nathan's Sharingan had betrayed him. The young shinobi's timing was flawless. The dragon, its frosty breath still lingering, couldn't evade the attack. With no time for another maneuver, Shuifeng grit his teeth and abandoned the beast to its fate. He threw himself behind the dragon's massive frozen form, hoping its bulk would shield him from the worst of the fireball's impact. Boom! The fireball smashed into the dragon's head in a deafening explosion. An immediate hiss filled the clearing as ice shattered and water vapor hissed upward. Within seconds, a swirling white mist began to envelop them, thickening faster than either of them could have anticipated. "Wait," Nathan started, alarm flaring in his chest. The fog was rising far too quickly, and something about its density felt ominously unnatural. Mist hiding technique? Nathan realized what was happening and began to form the seals for a wind-escape ninjutsu, hoping to scatter the mist. Before he could finish, a sudden chill shot up from the frozen sea beneath his feet. He looked down in time to see the water crystallize in an instant, filigree ice spreading across the surface. Then, without warning, a razor-sharp spike of ice burst upward like a thrown spear, aiming directly for his lower abdomen. Nathan twisted aside, narrowly evading the blow. But that was only the beginning. Hardly had his boots touched down when another ice spike exploded from the sea. Then a third, then a fourth, each one thrusting up with lightning speed, hemming him in. In seconds, jagged pillars of ice surrounded him on all sides, and Nathan was forced to stumble backward again and again. He backed toward the edge of the frozen platform, desperate to leap to safety, when a towering wall of ice shattered through the sheet beneath him, cutting off his retreat. Spinning around, he watched in alarm as 3 more walls rose simultaneously from the ice in the other directions. They climbed higher and higher, curving inward until their tops met overhead, sealing him inside a flawless dome of ice crystal. Trapped in this glittering cage, Nathan pressed his palm against the frigid barrier, exhaling in frosty puffs as he searched for any crack, any opening, through which he might escape. Nathan's breath fogged in the frigid chamber as he slammed his palm against the thickening ice. "Ice escape, ice prison technique," he hissed, infusing the wall with a surge of chakra. The ice's surface swelled outward, sealing him in an ever-tightening cell, and the temperature inside plummeted. Undeterred, Nathan crouched low, fingertips brushing the cold ground as he wove hand seals. "Fire escape, dragon fire technique," he roared. A jet of scorching flame erupted from his mouth, hammering the ice barrier. Cracks snaked across the surface and shards flew free, but even as the fracturing ice melted, Xuefeng's relentless chakra reinforcement refroze it almost instantly. Nathan wasted no time. He slammed both palms together and formed new seals. "Fire style, great fireball technique." A massive orb of roaring flame surged forward, blasting a gaping hole through the icy wall. Steam billowed as the fireball struck, but before Nathan could press his advantage, the void sealed up, replaced by solid ice that groaned into place. Cold frosted Nathan's hair, but resolve steeled him. Channeling chakra through his legs, he leaped back and swept his arms in a fierce arc. "Wind style, wind blade." A razor-sharp gust cut through the mouth of the prison, carving grooves in the ice. Still, the barrier held. Without hesitation, he dropped low again, hands tracing a fluid pattern. "Water style, water dragon bullet technique." A twisting torrent shot forward like a serpentine dragon, battering the ice. For a moment it looked as if the wall might shatter, but once more, Xuefeng's ice surged outward, smoothing over the damage. Nathan crouched amid the swirling frost and steam, chest heaving. He had thrown everything he had at the prison, and yet here he remained, trapped in Xuefeng's ever-growing ice cage. But if brute force wouldn't work, he'd find another way. With a steadying breath, he began to plan his next move. Snowflakes drifted through the air as the ice cage held fast. Nathan's fists pounded at the crystalline barrier, but it refused to crack. Outside, Xuefeng exhaled in relief at the sight. A mocking voice rang out, "Give up! No one has ever escaped my ice imprisonment technique." He laughed, the sound booming across the frozen clearing. "Ha ha, kid! You've got rotten luck running into me. You'll end up an ice statue before long." Xuefeng clicked her tongue twice and peered through the translucent wall, a sly grin on her lips. "The Uchiha's Sharingan is a rare prize. I think I'll be taking yours." Nathan paused mid-strike. "Oh, really?" He stepped forward and extended his hand. Instantly, chakra swirled around his palm, condensing into a dense, pale blue sphere. The Rasengan hovered before him, its energy humming with power. "You really believe that frozen barrier can stop me?" For the first time, Xuefeng's confident smile wavered. She poured more chakra into the ice wall, thickening its surface and boosting its hardness, all the while studying the spinning blue orb in Nathan's hand. Nathan's eyes narrowed as he confirmed what he'd long suspected. The chakra sphere could never shatter his ice release, ice prison technique. He let out a triumphant laugh. "You really thought you could out-cheat me?" Xuefeng's face darkened. He opened his mouth to retort, but before a single word escaped, a piercing shriek rent the air. The Rasengan in Nathan's palm swelled grotesquely, expanding several times its normal size, then morphed into a colossal wind-infused shuriken. As it spun, it whipped the atmosphere into a frenzy, producing that high-pitched howl. A surge of dread washed over Xuefeng. He remembered the dossier. Nathan had mastered a wind-release jutsu that had never appeared in any scroll or battlefield, and it was said to be devastatingly powerful. At the time, Xuefeng had written it off as rumor. Now he realized how grievously he'd underestimated his opponent. In a desperate bid for defense, Xuefeng channeled a torrent of chakra into his ice wall, reinforcing its crystalline bonds. But Nathan didn't hesitate. With a single, fluid motion, he rammed the tip of his wind release, Rasen Shuriken, into the barrier. The ice collapsed instantly, shattering like brittle glass and crumbling into powder at their feet. Xuefeng stood motionless, eyes wide with shock and an unspoken fury burning behind them. He had been so wrong about Nathan, and that mistake was about to cost him dearly. Impossible. The chakra needles embedded in the wind-style Rasen shuriken are microscopically sharp, capable of shredding targets at the cellular level. No ice wall, no matter how thick, could withstand such an assault. With effortless ease, Nathan stepped free from the shattered ice prison. Chapter 342. Escape. What? How was this possible? Xuefeng's eyes widened in disbelief as Nathan calmly strode out of the shattered ice prison. He'd never doubted that Nathan could break free from his ice release prison technique. After all, he'd felt the raw force behind Nathan's wind-release spiraling shuriken and suspected his ice cage might not hold. But he never expected such an effortless escape. With each step, Nathan crushed the icy powder that littered the ground, his gaze never leaving Xuefeng. He couldn't help but admire his opponent's strategy. From the beginning, Xuefeng had known better than to engage in close combat. Instead, he used massive, long-range attacks. First came the howling blizzard and the rampaging ice dragon, then the lethal ice spikes, and finally the impenetrable ice prison itself. Midway through their clash, Xuefeng even deployed water release, mist concealment, to sow confusion. Every move had been designed to defeat Nathan without ever coming within striking distance. It had been a brilliant plan, thorough and relentless. Unfortunately for Xuefeng, he had gravely underestimated Nathan's power. Now, as the frosty remnants of the prison drifted away, Nathan stood ready, unbroken and undeterred. Nathan weighed his options coolly. Even if the ice release, ice prison technique closed around him later, escape wasn't impossible. He still had the Mangekyo Sharingan's trump card, the pupil technique Heaven's Guard, which could shatter an ice cage in an instant. Beyond that, his Rasengan, fire release, great fireball technique, and wind release, wind blade, each offered a chance to break free. Just now, none of these attacks had fully succeeded, not because they were powerless, but because Nathan refused to linger inside the prison longer than necessary. Given time, the standoff would favor him. His opponent would tire before he did. After all, an ice prison's chief purpose is to immobilize, not to slay outright. It kills through steadily falling temperatures and the slow buildup of solid ice. With his current 16-point physique, Nathan could endure such a freeze for an extended period. During those critical moments, he could unleash successive torrents of chakra, fire-style jutsu and other techniques, hammering at the ice walls. Though they appeared endlessly self-regenerating, each layer of ice demanded its own chakra to maintain. The longer he could force his foe to pour energy into upkeep, the fewer reserves they'd have to counterattack, and the closer Nathan would be to breaking free. Nathan knew this fight would ultimately become a battle of attrition over chakra reserves, and he was absolutely certain his opponent simply didn't have as much stamina as he did. Even if Xuefeng's chakra control was shaky and his ice wall could regenerate slowly, its repair rate would never keep pace with Nathan's relentless onslaught. Sooner or later, Nathan would break through. He had more tricks up his sleeve than Xuefeng could ever imagine. As this realization dawned on Xuefeng, he sensed Nathan's advantage, and panic flickered across his eyes. At that moment, a faint green glow shimmered around Nathan. He dispelled the last of his wind escape chakra, channeling all his energy into the longsword he wielded. Xuefeng's face went pale. That unmistakable aura reminded him of the instant Nathan had slipped through the ice dragon's jaws not long ago. In an instant, Xuefeng vanished in a flash of chakra. Nathan spun and thrust forward, but found only empty air where Xuefeng had stood. No matter. He was ready for whatever came next. Nathan gave no quarter. He unleashed the instant sword technique again, surging forward as Xuefeng scrambled to put distance between them. After 2 weeks of relentless practice, Nathan had elevated the technique to level 4. His movements were now blisteringly fast. What once caught only Jonin by surprise was now a threat even to a seasoned shinobi like Xuefeng. For 3 bars of the village bell, Xuefeng darted and weaved, narrowly evading each blow. On the 4th strike, Na then seized the opening. A brilliant streak of blade light cut through the air. Xuefeng slammed his kunai against the long knife across his waist, the two metals meeting in a sharp clang. They rebounded, sparks dancing down their edges as Nathan pivoted the blade in his hand and launched a vicious follow-up aimed at Xuefeng's neck. Xuefeng's reflexes held. He twisted his wrist just in time, the kunai snapping upward to intercept the slash. Metal rang out once more. Nathan's expression remained cold and focused. He pressed the attack without pause. Xuefeng tightened his grip, bracing for the next furious onslaught. Nathan's opponent, Xuefeng, dared not look at the long sword for more than a heartbeat. Every time Nathan's blade hovered nearby, Xuefeng replied on pure instinct, his reflexes honed by past battles. It was obvious the Hidden Mist Village had leaked rumors of Nathan's famed illusion sword technique. Otherwise, no one would face that blade so cautiously. Nathan wasn't surprised. After the crushing defeat he dealt the village last time, they would have interrogated every survivor and collected every scrap of intelligence. Now, Hidden Mist ninjas were primed, each ready to counter his tricks. Like so many before him, Xuefeng abandoned offense in favor of defense, refusing to meet the sword's arc with his gaze or commit to a riposte. Parrying might hold off one strike, maybe two, but it couldn't stop Nathan's relentless assault. Nathan pressed the advantage, gripping his sword hilt with quiet intensity, not to kill, but to leave Xuefeng no room to breathe. For 2 grueling minutes, the two circled and clashed, steel ringing against steel. Then, blood seeping from a deep gash in his forearm, Xuefeng acknowledged reality. He broke off the fight, backing away to tend his wound, and Nathan's blade stayed poised, victory earned in every measured swing. Nathan bolted after Xuefeng the moment he sensed him pulling away, activating his instant sword technique without hesitation. But Xuefeng didn't run. He deftly formed a hand seal and unleashed ice substitution just as Nathan's blade closed in. The sword cleaved through a frozen, human-shaped decoy, shattering it into fragments. Nathan didn't pause. His gaze locked onto Xuefeng's real form, and, in the blink of an eye, he was off again. Sensing the murderous intent behind him, Xuefeng gritted his teeth, molded another seal, and split into 2 identical figures, one darting left, the other right. Unfazed, Nathan countered with his own jutsu, performing the shadow clone technique. Instantly, he had a doppelganger at his side. The clone went left to chase one of Xuefeng's images. Nathan himself pursued the other to the right. How he chose which to follow was simple. Instinct. Even his Sharingan couldn't tell the originals from the fakes, so he trusted his gut. Unfortunately, a minute later it was clear that his instincts had misled him. Nathan surveyed the shattered ice littering the waves and let out a low sigh. He'd felt a rush of excitement when he'd first caught up with his opponent. His strikes had landed cleanly time and again, yet the figure hadn't faltered. He never suspected it wasn't the real Xuefeng, but an ice-forged shadow clone. In retrospect, it made sense. An ice escape enhanced double would be far tougher than an ordinary shadow copy. What a shame. Shaking off the disappointment, Nathan planted both feet on the water's surface and launched himself forward, angling left. There, Xuefeng's true body was still grappling with his frozen imposter. But no sooner had Nathan shifted position than Xuefeng, his mind still reeling from the clone's residual memories, glanced Nathan's way and bolted without a backward look. In perfect synchronicity, the ice clone gave chase, and Nathan sprinted after them both. Once more, the 3 figures streaked across the shimmering sea, locked in a breathless pursuit beneath the open sky. Chapter 343, Clash Again. Meanwhile, on the opposite flank of the battlefield, Nathan's men were locked in combat with the reinforcements Xuefeng had summoned. Nearly 80 mist ninjas swarmed the field, still outnumbered by the 100 shinobi from Konoha, but not by much, and the air rang with battle cries and the clash of steel. Nathan, in hot pursuit of an enemy scout, cast a quick glance back at the skirmish. Seeing it held together for the moment, he turned his attention forward and pressed on. The chaotic fighting continued for several more minutes, neither side yielding an inch, until at last Xuefeng abandoned his evasions. They faced each other across a wind-lashed stretch of beach, the tide surging in rippling waves over a meter high. For an instant, time seemed to freeze, only the roar of the sea and distant shouts breaking the silence. Then, a sudden gale burst from the horizon, whipping Nathan's cloak around him. In that heartbeat, green chakra flared along his blade as he unleashed his signature instant sword technique. He blurred into a ghostly afterimage and closed the distance to Xuefeng in the blink of an eye. Xuefeng finished the hand seal in an instant, then stamped his right foot down on the ocean's surface. A crackling roar echoed as the water beneath him froze, the once sapphire waves turning into a sheet of sparkling white ice that radiated toward Nathan. In the blink of an eye, jagged ice spikes shot up like spears, forming a deadly barrier. Nathan's lips curved into a cold smile. With a single fluid swing of his longsword, he cleaved those spikes in half and charged forward without hesitation. Xuefeng's eyes flickered, and he hastily wove another seal before slamming both palms onto the frozen sea. A towering, circular wall of crystal ice erupted around him. Even from a distance, Nathan could see how impossibly thick it was. No ordinary blade could slice through such a fortress. Undeterred, Nathan drew a deep breath and gathered chakra into his left hand. The energy coalesced into a spinning sphere of brilliant blue light. It pulsed with raw power, swelling rapidly into the immense Big Ball Rasengan. The so-called Big Ball Rasengan is really just an amplified Rasengan, one that consumes far more chakra to form a denser, more potent sphere. As long as a shinobi's chakra control is precise enough, they can execute it just as easily as the standard Rasengan. In fact, there's virtually no structural difference between the two, which is why even the official Jutsu compendium makes no mention of it. Boom! The colossal Rasengan slammed into the ice wall, its condensed chakra erupting in a blinding flash. In an instant, the barrier shattered, sending frosty debris cascading to the floor. Nathan peered through the gaping circular hole, but Xuefeng was gone. Instinctively, Nathan knew his opponent hadn't fled. He was simply hiding beneath the ice's surface, waiting. No one can hold their breath indefinitely. Sooner or later, Xuefeng would have to come up for air. And even if he tried to tunnel his way out, the noise of breaking ice would echo through the chamber, alerting Nathan to his every move. With the ice barrier gone, Nathan would have no trouble pinpointing exactly where Xuefeng resurfaced. Nathan settled into position and waited, every muscle alert. He didn't let his guard down for a moment. His three-tomo Sharingan swept the frozen shoreline, picking up even the faintest shift in the wind or ripple on the water. The minutes drifted by slowly. After 2 minutes, the only sound was the sea breeze rustling over the ice. No footfalls, no distant whispers, nothing to suggest his opponent was near. Nathan smirked to himself. 2 minutes was a blink of an eye. If ordinary people could endure this stillness, a shinobi could easily wait much longer. At the 5-minute mark, the silence shattered. A deep crack erupted from beneath the ice, and a colossal crystal-clear dragon burst through the frozen surface. Jagged chunks of ice flew in all directions as the beast ascended into the sky, scales glinting like diamonds in the pale light. Atop the dragon's head stood Xuefeng. Nathan's Sharingan flared, instantly locking on to the figure's silhouette. Xuefeng turned, his piercing eyes meeting Nathan's across the distance, and the two warriors prepared to engage. Nathan studied the chakra radiating from his opponent and realized there was no sign of a shadow clone. This Xuefeng had to be the genuine article. With that certainty, he wasted no time. His hands blurred through the seals, he inhaled sharply, and unleashed the C-rank ninjutsu, fire style, dragon fire technique. Though notoriously tricky to control, its power and speed were unmatched. A column of searing flame roared from Nathan's mouth, coalescing into a snarling dragon that lunged straight for the ice crystal dragon's head. If it struck, not only would the creature shatter, but Xuefeng himself would be caught in the inferno. At the last instant, however, the ice crystal dragon threw back its head and exhaled a torrent of frigid air. The freeze blast met Nathan's fire dragon in mid-air with a deafening hiss. Steam billowed out in all directions, forming a thick white mist that swallowed the battlefield and obscured both combatants from view. Perched atop the giant dragon, Xuefeng prepared to unleash his old trick, water style, mist-hidden technique, to cloud Nathan's vision. But before he could form the seals, a faint, slicing whistle cut through the air. A surge of alarm rippled through him, and without a second's hesitation, Xuefeng dropped low, narrowly avoiding the razor-sharp wind blade. Indeed, it was a wind blade. Nathan had seized the exact moment Xuefeng began his ritual and struck with his own ninjutsu, wind style, wind blade. Unfortunately for him, Nathan's mastery stood only at level 6, 3,405, 10,000, still shy of the perfected level 7. His casting was slower, and the follow-through weaker than it would be at full power. Had his technique been fully honed, Xuefeng's reflexes alone wouldn't have saved him. "What a pity," Nathan murmured, retracting his hand. Relief and rage warred inside Xuefeng's chest. If he hadn't dropped so instinctively, the wind blade would have ended him. Realizing how close he'd come to beheading, Xuefeng's eyes flared with anger. Nathan barely had time to brace himself when Xuefeng's ice dragon lunged down. Its massive claws tore through the air faster than he'd ever imagined such a colossal beast could move. A blast of frigid wind hit his face, and before he could react, the dragon's talons were upon him. At that split second, a blade of green light sprang to life around Nathan. He channeled his instant sword technique and vanished in an instant. Boom! The dragon's claws smashed into the frozen ground where he had stood, shattering the ice in a thunderous roar. Hundreds of razor-sharp shards exploded outward like deadly shrapnel. Cling! 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 Nathan reappeared a mere hair's breadth away and swept his long sword in graceful arcs, deflecting every fragment. His blade rang out with each strike, steam rising where metal met ice. But before he could steady himself, a rush of wind announced the dragon's next move. Nathan glanced over his shoulder in time to see the beast's tail, a rolling wave of solid frost, barreling straight at him like an unstoppable wall. He knew he couldn't challenge that head-on. With a grunt, he dove aside, the ice wall slamming into the void he'd just vacated. Chunks of frozen ground sprayed up where the tail struck. Still, Xuefeng's control never wavered. The dragon surged again, jaws snapping, claws whipping, tail swinging. An unrelenting onslaught, born of sheer size and power. Nathan darted and weaved, slashing at every attack, but each dodge only led to another. He felt as small and vulnerable as an insect beneath an elephant's heel, hunted across the ice with no room for error. And all the while, the dragon bore down on him with merciless precision. No matter how impressive you seem, a single solid strike is all it takes to shatter everything. Chapter 344. When one crisis subsides, another emerges. Nathan narrowly avoided the ice dragon's claw, the chill of its frosted talons rushing past him. A fleeting thought flashed through his mind. Could he even withstand the creature's power if he summoned his Susanoo? He banished the idea as quickly as it came. Even if he could freely deploy his Mangekyo Sharingan, not yet possible, his Sharingan's evolution was still less than 20% complete. His Susanoo, in this embryonic state, was nothing more than a few spectral bones, a far cry from a shield capable of stopping an ice dragon's assault. This beast was Xuefeng's trump card, forged from her formidable chakra. No matter how wondrous his ocular powers were, heightened perception, split-second reactions, he would be shredded to pieces if caught in a full-strength blow. So far, the Sharingan's insight had allowed him to evade the dragon's claws, but he couldn't keep this up forever. On the other side, Xuefeng was also consuming an immense amount of chakra to maintain control over such a massive ice construct. Their duel had reached an impasse. Neither could sustain the strain indefinitely. Nathan steadied his breathing, eyes locked on the coiling dragon. He knew that a single misstep here would be fatal, but so would letting Xuefeng's energy reservoir outlast his own. The next move would decide everything. Nathan remained poised, waiting for his opponent to slip up, ready to deliver a decisive blow the moment an opening appeared. In the blink of an eye, 10 minutes had passed. A biting, frosty mist blasted toward him, charged with the ice dragon's unrelenting chill. Nathan's hands whipped into precise seals. "Fire release, great fireball technique," he intoned, unleashing a colossal sphere of flame that roared forward, vaporizing the frigid air before it could envelop him. No sooner had the mist cleared than the ice dragon lashed out with a massive claw. Nathan vanished in a blur, sidestepping the strike with his instant sword technique. He landed lightly on one knee, only to see the dragon's massive weight descending upon him. Refusing to be pinned, Nathan triggered the body flicker technique 3 times in rapid succession. His form flickered like a mirage as he darted out of the dragon's crushing embrace. Seizing the moment, he thrust both hands forward. Fire release, dragon flame technique. A torrent of roaring fire erupted around him, scorching the dragon's flank and the sorcerer Shuifeng perched atop its back. Scales sizzled and melted, steam rising in a hiss of defeat. Shuifeng hissed in fury, but wasted no time. He poured chakra into the wounded scales, knitting them together in an instant. Fully healed, he commanded the ice dragon into another relentless assault. Nathan's heart pounded as he danced back, narrowly evading icy fangs and talons. Each dodge drew him closer to his adversary's flank, closer to the opening he so desperately sought. And with every breath, he prepared to strike back with all the fire at his command. In the 10 minutes since the battle began, Nathan and Shuifeng had been locked in unrelenting attack and defense, neither daring to drop their guard. Nathan's calm, measured strikes contrasted sharply with Shuifeng's growing impatience. As Nathan had anticipated, sustaining a colossal ice dragon jutsu was devouring Shuifeng's chakra reserves at an alarming rate. Anxiety crept in, and with it, the promise of a mistake. Sure enough, 2 minutes later, Nathan narrowly slipped out of the dragon's claw swipe and noticed Shuifeng's next motion was just a fraction too slow, hesitation in his eyes. In an instant, Nathan recognized his chance. Without pausing to finish the downward arc of his longsword, he redirected its swing to block a shower of shattered ice. His free hand sprang into a rapid series of seals, and in that split second, he unleashed his ninjutsu. Wind-style, spiral shuriken. A howl of wind erupted as razor-sharp shuriken spun into being, each disc riding a miniature tornado. The furious swirls of air sliced through the battlefield with a harsh, ringing cry, bearing down on Shuifeng and his faltering ice dragon. Nathan's massive chakra shuriken spun violently in his hand, tearing at the air with a high-pitched whistle. Fragments of broken ice scattered in its wake. Shuifeng's expression tightened as he ordered his ice dragon to retreat, but it was too late. The dragon's enormous head pulled away first, leaving its tail anchored in place. In that instant, Nathan seized his chance. With a swift hand seal, he unleashed wind. Style, Rasen Shuriken, pressing the spinning jutsu directly against the dragon's frozen tail where it met the ice. A sharp, crackling hiss echoed out as countless microscopic wind blades carved through the creature's icy form, shredding its molecular structure. In an explosive cascade of shimmering shards, the ice dragon shattered, its magic undone in a flash. Shuifeng stumbled backward at the sight, fury and disbelief flashing across his face. Impossible, he gasped, staring at the drifting ice fragments. Nathan stood steady, Rasen Shuriken still whirling in his palm. His eyes were calm, unwavering. "You underestimated me," Nathan said, his voice quiet but firm, "and you'll make the same mistake again if you refuse to back down." A tense silence fell across the frozen battlefield. Snow swirled around the broken remnants of Shuifeng's ice dragon. An unspoken challenge crackled in the air between them. Neither ninja flinched. Neither would relent. In the swirling flurry of ice chips, Nathan's eyes locked onto Shuifeng's position. A sudden emerald glow flickered along his blade as he unleashed his famed instant sword technique. In the next heartbeat, he vanished and reappeared directly before his opponent. A razor-sharp arc of steel cut through the air. Shuifeng reflexively raised his kunai, and with a loud clang, the two weapons met. The shock of the impact threw Shuifeng off balance, sending him stumbling backward over the slick ice. Before he could steady himself, Nathan struck again. The blade's cold gleam flashed in Shuifeng's eyes, momentarily blinding him. Panic flared in Shuifeng's chest. He'd been hit. Though he'd heard tales of Nathan's deadly skill from his village, he never imagined it would feel like this. Silent, seamless, and utterly inescapable. There had been no warning wind-up, no chance to brace, only a single, perfectly timed strike. Nathan allowed himself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Fortune had favored him today. A fortnight ago, he wouldn't have spotted such a flawless opportunity. But now, his blade had done all the talking. After 2 weeks of relentless training, Nathan's illusion sword technique had finally advanced from level 5 to level 6. Now, with a single thought, he could weave illusions seamlessly into his swordplay, transforming even a simple chop into a devastating trick strike. He seized the moment. There was a sharp swish as Nathan's blade arced through the air and sliced across Shuifeng's chest. The long sword tore through fabric and flesh alike, leaving a furrowed scar. Dark crimson blood blossomed instantly, soaking his tunic. Yet Nathan pressed on. He flicked his right foot against the ice, pivoting his body a full 360 degrees, and brought his sword down in a second, crushing blow. This time, Xuefeng didn't lock eyes on Nathan's weapon. Instead, he tilted his head, tuning into the faint vibration of the blade's motion. Spotting the angle of attack, he thrust his kunai forward to intercept the strike. But pain from his chest wound slowed his arm, and the kunai wavered just enough for Nathan's sword to nick its edge and cut deeper into Xuefeng's defenses. Nathan's eyes lit up at the perfect opening. With a quick twist of his wrist, he snatched up the kunai that Xuefeng had dropped and slashed again. Alarmed, Xuefeng poured the last of his chakra into a protective barrier, ice armor crackling into place around him. The kunai bit into the icy shell with a shriek of metal on ice, gouging a deep rut, but the armor held firm, and Xuefeng was undisturbed. He used the anchor of that impact to vault back several paces, putting distance between them. Nathan inhaled sharply, ready to close in for the finishing blow, when a powerful ripple of chakra rolled across the field. He froze and turned. On the far edge of the clearing, an immense wave of energy was rising, like a living tsunami poised to swallow everything in its path. And riding its crest was a lone figure clad in a black robe and mask, a shinobi from the Hidden Mist village. Chapter 345, First Fight. Finally, you've arrived. Xuefeng let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding as he watched Nathan's figure emerge across the icy waves. From the moment he'd received his orders, he'd been told, if you can't finish Nathan off quickly, drag the battle out as long as possible. At the time, Xuefeng hadn't understood the reasoning behind such a plan, but now everything clicked. This was the backup operation. Delay Nathan, and Konoha's 2 passenger ships would be lost before any rescue could arrive. With those ships gone, the troops attacking Konoha's northern defenses wouldn't have to worry about being flanked. A smug confidence filled Xuefeng's chest as he prepared to capitalize on his superior's strategy. Then he caught Nathan's cold, unwavering gaze. For a heartbeat, Xuefeng's arrogance faltered. Shaking off the unease, Xuefeng stamped down with all his weight on the ice at his feet. Crack! A jagged fissure shot across the surface. In the next instant, the ice gave way, and Xuefeng plunged into the freezing sea. The water closed over his head, and whatever warmth or chakra he'd been drawing vanished in an instant. Nathan crouched at the edge of the shattered ice, eyes narrowed. The first move had been made. Now the real battle would begin. Nathan reappeared at the mouth of the ice cavern and glanced into the darkness, where Xuefeng had vanished without a trace. He knew he wouldn't catch him today, but could he afford to linger? Behind him, a colossal wave rose, ready to engulf the entire battlefield. A green flash enveloped him as he activated his instant sword technique. In an instant, he became a phantom afterimage, streaking back toward the fray, specifically toward the Kirigakure Anbu still chanting incantations amidst the chaos. Nathan weaved through the panicked shinobi, skimming atop the swelling waters until he reached the enemy operative. Even as he closed the distance, the Anbu never halted the spell. Then the tsunami crashed down, submerging the battlefield in a frothing deluge. Thanks to an earlier warning, most ninjas had scattered to safety. But the ships anchored offshore, the 2 Konoha passenger vessels and Kirigakure's warship, could not escape. They sank beneath the crushing waves. If only that had been the worst of it. Nathan studied the shattered remains of the boat strewn across the shoreline. In calmer circumstances, they might have hauled it out, pumped out the water, and patched it up for further use. But these weren't ordinary circumstances. The enemy had summoned a powerful, rotating wave that engulfed the vessel and ripped it to pieces in seconds. It became clear that the attackers' true objective wasn't simply to kill Konoha's shinobi, it was to destroy their means of retreat. In the same assault, the Hidden Mist village's warships had also been pulverized. With both fleets lost, neither side could fall back to safety. Cut off from their boats, the Mist Ninobi stranded on the battlefield would have no choice but to stand and fight. Nathan clenched his jaw. Stranded, outnumbered, and surrounded, the Mist Ninobi might well turn the skirmish into a last-ditch, all-or-nothing brawl. But he knew that if it came to deadly combat, his own strength would carry the day, and the Mist would be the ones to suffer in the end. Nathan watched the Kirigakure Anbu move with cold efficiency, casually sacrificing his own men to achieve his goal. The sheer brutality and the flamboyant artistry of his chakra sent a chill down Nathan's spine. There was only one shinobi he knew who fought like this. Hoshigaki Kasame, the infamous tailed beast without a tail. He steeled himself. Even if it truly was Kasame standing before him, Nathan vowed he would not flinch. In a blur of motion, he lashed out with his long knife, aiming straight for the stranger's throat. But the ambu was faster than he looked. With a sudden roll, he ducked the blade by mere inches. Before Nathan could recover, a crushing kick drove into his abdomen, leaving him gasping for air. Nathan sprang backward, sting just in time to dodge the ambu's sweeping kick. In the next heartbeat, a faint green glow shot past him, and Nathan used his instant sword technique, reappearing at his opponent's flank with his long blade flashing in a deadly arc. Clang! The clash of steel rang through the night. Nathan realized the masked shinobi had produced a second sword from behind his back, effortlessly parrying the strike. Through the narrow slit of the ambu mask, Nathan caught a glimpse of golden irises, cold, unreadable, utterly devoid of emotion. In those eyes, there was only a calculating indifference, as though nothing in the world could touch him. The sight sent a chill down Nathan's spine. It was the same unfeeling gaze he'd seen on root operatives, warriors who viewed friend and foe alike as mere tools. And if this was Hoshigaki Kasame in disguise, there was little to distinguish him. Either way, he was a shinobi for whom the mission came before all else. Nathan knew full well the difference between a manufactured shinobi and a true warrior. The root operatives were nothing more than mission tools, sealed, brainwashed, drilled from birth in self-annihilation drills. Hoshigaki Kasame, on the other hand, was the real deal. He'd mastered the art of suppressing his own emotions by sheer force of will, forging himself into the coldest weapon in Kirigakure. There simply was no comparison. Suddenly, a harsh screech filled the night as Nathan's blade clashed with the anbu's. Sparks flew where steel met steel, and for a heartbeat, neither man yielded. Then Nathan's Sharingan flared to life. The anbu, who moments before had met his gaze without flinching, closed his eyes in panic. In that instant, he sheathed his sword, kicked off the water's surface, and slipped backward in a fluid retreat. Freed from the stalemate, Nathan stepped forward and swung his katana. The blade cleaved through mask and flesh in a single arc. Under the shattered mask lay the unmistakable features of the shark, Kasame Hoshigaki himself. Nathan's eyes widened. Kasame? Is that really you? Hearing his own name, Kisaki Kasame, already locked in a defensive stance, flicked his gaze toward Nathan in surprise. Normally, being called out by a stranger would jar anyone. In a fight, however, that fraction of a second's hesitation could be fatal. Nathan seized the opening. He lunged forward and thrust his long knife with deadly precision. The blade caught the light as it rocketed toward Kisaki's chest. Though Kisaki was an elite jonin with razor-sharp reflexes, he realized too late that Nathan had baited him. With no time for a proper parry, he stumbled back half a pace and flung up his forearm as a desperate shield. Flesh and blood absorbed the blow, the tip of the blade biting into his forearm and grinding against bone. A stifled gasp escaped Kisaki's lips as pain flickered in his eyes, but he forced himself to steel his expression. In an instant, he leapt backward and landed several meters away, putting distance between himself and Nathan. Chapter 346, Reflections. Nathan's expression didn't change as he sized up Kasame, who stood several meters away. He flicked the blood from his blade and vanished in an instant. A flash of green light heralded Nathan's instant sword technique as he reappeared right beside Kasame. With a sharp exhale, he swung his longsword in a lethal arc aimed at Kasame's neck. At the last moment, Kasame sidestepped, lifting his own blade to meet Nathan's strike. Steel rang out on steel with a crisp clang. Nathan didn't pause to lock blades. He sheathed his sword in one fluid motion and launched a new assault, only to have Kasame once again meet him, blade raised. Nathan pressed the attack, and Kasame held firm. For a breathless moment, the air filled with the relentless ringing of iron on iron. Even without the legendary greatsword Samahata at his side, Kasame's skill was undeniable. Though he found himself driven to defense, there was not a hint of faltering in his stance. Nathan's interest was piqued. He ran through every sword technique he knew, probing his opponent's limits and his own. Time slipped by, and before he knew it, 5 minutes had passed. With a sharp whoosh, Nathan unleashed his instant sword technique, appearing at Kasame's side and swinging his blade in a deadly arc. Kasame barely managed to twist away, but the edge still grazed his shoulder. Nathan allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. A scratch was only a scratch, but it represented progress. 5 minutes of sparring had revealed Kasame's fighting patterns, and thanks to his Sharingan, Nathan now had the means to exploit them even further. Kasame's own expression darkened. He had already noted each of Nathan's moves. Yet he betrayed no panic. His ninjutsu remained an ace up his sleeve. Before either warrior could shift tactics, Nathan surged forward with another slash. Clang, clang, clang. Their blades met in a sharp, rhythmic clash, echoing across the training ground. Nathan's swordplay was a tempest unleashed. He advanced in a blinding flurry of slashes and feints, each strike so swift that Kasame Kasaki could barely track the gleam of steel. For what felt like an eternity, nearly 3 minutes of relentless assault, Nathan pressed him unerringly, the shadows of his blade dancing overhead, some real, most illusions, all calculated to overwhelm. At last, Nathan's long blade flashed true. It bit into Kasame's side, drawing a thin line of blood. "Again!" he roared, voice ringing like a battle horn. He pivoted on his heel and struck forward once more, every move charged with feral precision. Realizing he could not outduel Nathan in pure swordsmanship, Kasame made his decision in an instant. He snapped his greatsword back into its sheath, slung it onto his back, and sealed his hands in rapid succession. With a forceful exhalation, he unleashed his ninjutsu, water escape, and water prison technique. In a heartbeat, a translucent dome of pale blue water erupted around him, trapping him at its center. Nathan lashed out at the barrier, but the blade dragged through the water field as though he'd plunged it into thick mud. The thin membrane of the prison shimmered deceptively, but inside it was filled with dense seawater infused with Kasame's escape chakra, an ingenious shock absorber that blunted every ounce of Nathan's formidable strength. Undaunted, Nathan drew back, sizing up his opponent's new defense and preparing his next move. Nathan's sword passed harmlessly through the churning water. Kasame Kasaki's jutsu rendered the blade useless. Seizing the moment, Kasaki swiftly formed hand seals and unleashed water release, water body technique. 2 humanoid water clones ripped free from his form and surged toward Nathan. Though each doppelganger wielded barely a tenth of Kasaki's true strength, they were more than enough to pin Nathan down for a few critical heartbeats. Nathan met them head-on, his sword slicing both figures apart in a single sweep. Before he could recover, Kasaki had already begun chanting again. With a thunderous slap of his palm against the EA's surface, he activated water release, rain shark technique. 4 enormous water sharks burst from the ocean in a blinding geyser, soaring high above the deck before plummeting toward Nathan like torpedoes. On the ship's deck, Nathan looked up at the diving predators. In that instant, a warning flashed through his mind. If the sharks made contact, they would shatter into thousands of miniature sharks and water bombs, overwhelming any defense. Nathan steadied his grip on the hilt, preparing for the deluge about to engulf him. Nathan barely dodged the incoming strike. 4 massive sharks smashed into the water's surface with resounding thuds, sending curtains of spray skyward. Then, in an instant, each giant shark fractured into dozens of smaller, razor-toothed pursuers. Even without taking the initiative, the enemy, Inikigaki Kasame, had split his sharks into 1,000 tiny projectiles, all racing toward him at once. Nathan exhaled with thinly veiled frustration. "I shouldn't rely on past life memories as gospel," he reminded himself, swinging his long blade in a deadly arc. Each small shark was torn apart with surgical precision, tiny bodies shredding in the spray. No sooner had he dispatched the last feeble thrashers than Kasame's second assault unfolded. The shark-like shinobi's hands wove a rapid series of seals. His broad chest heaved, and he unleashed a torrent of seawater from his jaws. In moments, a towering wave, more than 10 meters high, thundered directly toward Nathan, dwarfing even the massive flood that had nearly submerged the entire battlefield not long ago. As the monstrous wall of water bore down, Nathan couldn't suppress his awe. Kasame's chakra reserves were phenomenal, enough to reshape the sea itself at will. Now it was all he could do to steel himself for the next onslaught. Nathan realized he was outmatched. He could feel it in every cell of his body. Against this opponent, he stood no chance, at least not yet. As he braced himself for the next attack, he couldn't help but mutter, "So it's not just a silly nickname. Tailless Beast is earned." A spark of hope ignited in his chest. If he could somehow capture Hoshigaki Kisame and turn him into a chakra battery, he'd effectively possess an extra-tailed beast, an endless power source to accelerate every jutsu he knew. The thought made his pulse pound. He stared at Kisame as though he were a priceless relic, just waiting to be claimed. Yet when he met Kisame's greedy gaze in return, Nathan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. With scarcely a thought, he poured more chakra into his own technique, unleashing a colossal surge of water chakra. Even so, he forced himself to rein in his ambition and backed away swiftly. He couldn't afford to force the capture now, not without a plan. Revealing the full scope of his strength might let him stand against Kisame's tidal assault, but it would also be the surest way to drive the tailless beast off before Nathan even had a chance to trap him. So, he fell back and waited, quietly stoking his reserves for the moment the real fight could begin. Nathan felt a surge of frustration. If he acted recklessly now, he'd accomplish nothing. What he needed was patience, wait for the perfect opening, then unleash his thunderous technique to finish his opponent in a single, decisive strike. The others could wait. Suddenly, the sea before him began to recede, voraciously drawing back tons of water. The surface under Nathan's feet dropped so abruptly he had to steady himself, and on the horizon a towering wall of foam rose higher and higher. Even Nathan, with all his training, couldn't help but feel a flicker of insignificance, like a lone man bowed before a raging storm. Then he reminded himself of the power dwelling behind his Manjikyo Sharingan and the advanced proficiency panel he'd mastered. A rush of resolve replaced his unease. Staring down those monstrous breakers, he no longer felt fear. Instead, anticipation crackled through him, as electric and vivid as the lightning he was about to summon. Chapter 347. Learning. The wall of water loomed over him, but Nathan didn't hesitate. He dove beneath the surface just in time. The wave crashed down with a muted thunder, its force rippling through the sea and slamming into Nathan. He felt every bone rattle, his vision flickering as a metallic taste flooded his mouth. He spat out blood, grimaced, and knew his internal organs had taken a serious hit. Underwater, Nathan pressed his palms together and began forming hand seals. With a deep breath, he channeled his chakra into the palm immortal technique, directing a sphere of yang-imbued energy throughout his torso. Instantly, the searing pain in his chest and abdomen eased as the healing jutsu went to work. Though the palm immortal technique couldn't fully mend severe internal traumas, it was more than enough to stabilize him. Coupled with his natural resilience, bolstered by a physique rating of 16, Nathan's body would mend itself completely in short order. He relaxed his shoulders, letting the chakra circulation take over. Moments later, the burst of light from the technique faded, and the ache in Nathan's organs receded to a dull throb. He surfaced, treading water as he assessed the situation. Whatever force had summoned that tidal wall, he was ready for what came next. Sometimes it happens like this. No matter how skilled you are, if your opponent has a deep well of chakra, a single strike can end you. Nathan had used that fact to bully others before, but now the tables were turned. As that thought crossed his mind, 5 ravenous sharks exploded from the sky, charging at him like the deadliest predators on Earth. Nathan sized them up instantly and recognized they weren't real animals but water-crafted illusions, Hoshigaki Kisame's signature 5 tails shark technique. By combining it with his water-release ninjutsu, Kisame could trap an enemy in water and keep summoning shark after shark for as long as he had chakra on the surface. Without that knowledge, any opponent would be in serious trouble. With it, Nathan knew exactly what he was facing. He didn't hesitate. Forming the necessary hand seals, he channeled a surge of chakra and unleashed wind release, great breakthrough. In an instant, the 5 summoned sharks before him were engulfed by Nathan's howling winds. Razor-sharp blades of air sliced through their bodies, shredding them to pieces. At the same time, the vortex Nathan expelled from his mouth churned the surrounding seawater, carving a clear tunnel through the waves. Seizing his chance, Nathan darted into the corridor and burst back up to the surface. Hoshigaki Kasame's brow furrowed as he watched his prey escape. His 5 sharks were still materializing. How had Nathan slipped through so quickly? Should have tested that jutsu first, he muttered. But there was no time to dwell on mistakes. As soon as Nathan resurfaced, Kasame formed hand seals and unleashed. Water style, water wave. What would normally rank as a basic sea-level technique struck with the force of a B-level attack, empowered by Kasame's vast chakra. A roaring torrent of seawater erupted from his mouth like a massive cannon, hurtling straight at Nathan. Quick as a flash, Nathan bounded back in a series of agile leaps, putting distance between himself and the oncoming deluge, and buying himself precious seconds to prepare his next move. Nathan barely had time to react before the water projectile bore down on him. With a quick series of hand seals, he unleashed his water-style, water array wall. In an instant, a transparent barrier of churning water sprang up, colliding with the oncoming shot in a muffled roar. Spray exploded in all directions before the 2 streams dispersed into the sea. Nathan exhaled sharply, no pause, no wasted motion, and dove straight into his next jutsu. Water style, water dragon bullet technique, he called. After 2 weeks of relentless training, both his water array wall and water dragon bullet had reached 4th level. Not only did they hit harder, but he could summon them in the time it takes to blink. A curling, draconic torrent materialized before him, each scale of liquid pulse crackling with raw chakra. With a deafening roar, the water dragon surged toward Hoshigaki Kasame. Yet Kasame was a seasoned elite. He'd sensed the shift in chakra the moment Nathan formed that final seal. With a cold, confident smirk, he too executed his own technique. Water style, great shark bullet. A massive shark-shaped blast tore through the waves, teeth bared and ready to devour Nathan's dragon head-on. A bizarre sight unfolded before Nathan. A colossal, shark-shaped water bomb formed at Hoshigaki Kasame's feet, then shot skyward and swallowed Nathan's spiraling water dragon jutsu whole. In an instant, the shark swelled to twice its size and bore down on him like a living tsunami. Most shinobi would have frozen. This technique devours enemy ninjutsu to amplify itself, making direct resistance a death sentence. But Nathan grinned. He'd anticipated Kasame's counter. Ever since unlocking his Sharingan's copying power, he'd quietly duplicated this very move. Sure enough, his skill panel now displayed. Water style, great shark technique, what one, and he'd already raised it to mastery level 5. Choosing water as his 3rd chakra nature had paid off in spades. Calmly closing the panel, Nathan steadied himself. He pressed his right foot against the sea's surface, channeling water nature chakra outward. The ocean at once solidified into a glittering platform beneath him. Eyes blazing with determination, he faced the onrushing shark wave, ready to turn Kasame's ultimate jutsu back against its creator. Nathan's chakra exploded outward, propelling him several meters back with a thunderous boom. The colossal shark-shaped missile he'd just deflected slammed into the sea, sending towering waves crashing around him. Clinging to the slippery rocks for stability, he braced himself as Hoshigaki Kasame wove another rapid series of hand seals. Water style, water shark bullet technique, Kasame roared. In an instant, a gleaming torrent coalesced into a second shark missile and hurtled straight at Nathan. Instead of confronting it head-on, Nathan sidestepped at the last possible moment, the missile erupting into a spray of seawater where he'd stood. But Kasame wasn't finished. With barely a breath between seals, he unleashed a twin barrage, 2 more shark missiles that streaked through the air like torpedoes. Nathan darted left, then right, narrowly avoiding each spinning assault. The sea around them churned into a roiling cauldron. He was on the defensive, every evasion leaving him a bit more drained. Yet amid the chaos, Nathan spotted his chance. After the 3rd missile sped past, a gap opened between the surging waves. Gathering his remaining chakra, he focused on the advanced jutsu he had painstakingly copied and mastered only moments before. Water style, great shark bullet technique, he called. Instantly, the ocean itself seemed to obey. A massive, spiraling shark of pure water formed before him, its maw lined with rows of liquid teeth. Fueled by Nathan's chakra, it surged forward like a coiling dragon, cutting through the tumultuous waters toward Kasame with deadly precision. Nathan's mastery of the jutsu was only at level 1, Yet the shark-shaped missile he summoned effortlessly swallowed Kasame's own shark missiles whole. The beast then swelled in size and lunged at Hoshigaki Kasame, who stood just yards away. Kasame's lips curled into an ugly sneer. No shinobi liked seeing their hardest-learned techniques turned against them. Still, he had no choice but to grit his teeth and bear it. Such was the irritating flaw of the Sharingan. Chapter 348, The Trap. Kasame Hoshigaki gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay calm. As his shark-shaped projectiles lunged at Nathan, he vanished in a blur, deploying the body flicker technique to slip out of their path, and immediately struck back with ruthless precision. Nathan didn't flinch. He met Kasame head-on, matching blow for blow. Though his chakra reserves were smaller, he more than compensated with speed and tenacity, locking the two of them in a ferocious exchange. The thunder of their clash rolled across the open sea. Had they fought on land, their battle would have spanned miles. Even here, the force of every strike sent ripples through the ranks of Mist and Konoha shinobi, who instinctively fell back, unwilling to draw too close. For nearly 15 minutes, the duel raged without a clear victor. Kasame's seasoned reflexes countered Nathan's fierce adaptability at every turn. Finally, realizing that neither close-quarters combat nor pure ninjutsu would end this quickly, Kasame shifted tactics. With a shark-like grin, he plunged beneath the waves, drawing the fight into the depths, his true domain, where his aquatic mastery would give him the decisive edge. Nathan's unique physiology let him breathe underwater like a fish, granting him an overwhelming edge in submerged combat. He knew this, and knew too that diving in would only hand that advantage to his opponent, so he never left the surface. What had started as a chaotic clash above and below the waves had settled into an eerie calm around them. Chest high in the cold sea, Nathan activated his 3 Magatama Sharingan to its maximum potential. His crimson eyes probed the undulating water, every sense stretched taut, alert for the slightest hint of Hoshigaki Kasame's ambush. Beneath the waves, Kasame lay perfectly still, patient as only a seasoned Anbu operative, trained to be nothing more than a weapon, could be. Here, the battlefield itself conspired in his favor. Nathan had nowhere to retreat, and Kasame had all the time in the world. Kasame's orders were clear: stall Nathan long enough for Xuefeng and their allies to be delayed on the northern front. Every second wasted above this silent expanse of sea was another victory for him. Yet Kasame's calm resolve did not guarantee Nathan's acquiescence. The standoff stretched on, the only sound the gentle wash of water against their bodies, each warrior poised to strike the moment the other faltered. Nathan's support ship lay in ruins, his mission seemingly a total failure, but he couldn't just turn back. Retreat would be unthinkable. Stranded and outnumbered, he'd have to push forward into the fray. Paradoxically, this dire situation presented the perfect opening. He hadn't forgotten his plan. To harness Hoshigaki Kasame as his personal chakra battery, Nathan needed to capture him alive, and what better cover than the chaos of defeat? Still, he understood the stakes. This was his one shot. Once Kasame rallied his wits, any hope of subduing him would vanish. Worse, Kasame's notorious temper and grim resolve meant that if he sensed betrayal or the inevitability of capture, he might choose a fatal last stand rather than be taken prisoner. Nathan had to strike swiftly and watch every ally and enemy on the field. Mist ninja, Konoha shinobi, even rogue operatives could interfere. More importantly, to seal Kasame's capture alive, Nathan would have to employ his Manjikyo Sharingan, his second most carefully guarded secret. He couldn't risk exposing that power unless the moment demanded it. Now more than ever, timing and discretion would decide his success or utter humiliation. Nathan weighed every factor that might expose his secrets. He couldn't afford a slip-up. Fortunately, his recent clash with Hoshigaki Kasame had sent local informants fleeing, buying him this precious isolation. From here, as long as he stayed alert, no one would dare approach. Minutes crawled by in tense silence, thoughts flickering through his mind. Retreat, parley, strike. Finally, he made his decision. Almost at once, the water behind him swelled and surged. Nathan spun on his heel, eyes blazing with resolve. "Let's go," he whispered. His hands flew through the seals of water style, water dragon bullet. A colossal serpent of roiling water burst from the lake, racing skyward. Across the clearing, Kasame mirrored the jutsu, forging his own draconic torrent. The two beasts collided in midair with a thunderous crack, shattering the calm and sending a deluge cascading down like a monsoon. Rain hammered the ground, blurring Nathan's vision. Then, through the roaring wall of water, a solitary figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, and utterly merciless. Hoshigaki Kasame stepped forward, lifting one hand to weave chakra into the very storm, a predatory grin splitting his face. The battle was far from over. In an instant, a storm of razor-thin needles slashed through the air toward Nathan. He sensed the threat immediately. Rather than advance, he fell back. With a swift swirl, he drew his longsword, its blade gleaming as he planted his feet. The needles rained down, but Nathan met them head-on, parrying each one with precise, ringing strikes. At the same time, he surged forward, closing the gap on Hoshigaki Kasame. The shark-like shinobi turned toward the sea, preparing to dive back into the water and vanish. Nathan anticipated his move. He stepped onto the ocean's surface and poured chakra into the surrounding water, using his water-nature transformation to thicken it. The sea grew unnaturally viscous, trapping Kasame in place the way wind chakra might sharpen a blade, only here it was water and far less efficient. Still, Nathan's chakra reserves were more than enough to sustain the technique. The effect was immediate. The ocean's surface slowed to syrupy sluggishness, cutting off Kasame's escape route. Seizing the moment, Nathan closed in. Swish, Nathan's long sword sliced through the air, and the duel shifted into terrain he knew well. In their previous fight, his blade work had fallen short of Kasame's mastery, but with no other choice, he drew his sword and pressed forward. Clang! Clang! The clash of steel rang out as Nathan's strikes came fast and furious. His three Tomoe Sharingan flared to life, tracking every subtle shift in Kasame's stance. Drawing on past encounters and instinct, he anticipated the next move almost before it happened. In less than a minute, Nathan found his opening. He drove the tip of his long sword straight into Kasame's chest. A sharp gasp escaped his opponent, yet, to Nathan's astonishment, no blood welled from the wound. Instead, a viscous liquid dripped onto the ground with an odd mechanical ticking. Nathan froze, heart pounding. He forced himself backward, eyes wide. This wasn't over, and whatever had just pierced the armor wasn't ordinary blood. Something's wrong, he muttered, tightening his grip on the hilt. His pulse raced as he braced for whatever came next. Nathan watched in alarm as the towering form of Hoshigaki Kasame at the original spot suddenly shuddered with a crackling bang and dissolved into a roiling pool of seawater that crashed back onto the ocean's surface. He realized, too late, that it had only been a water clone. Nathan barely managed to step backward when a massive hand burst from beneath the waves, slamming into his back and pinning him in place. In an instant, a dome of pale blue water erupted around him, tightening like a vice. Nathan thrashed, but every motion only churned more water against his skin. He recognized the technique immediately, Kasame's feared specialty, water release. Water prison technique. Trapped in the unyielding barrier, Nathan struggled for breath as the ocean itself became his cage. Chapter 349, Interference. Nathan felt the crushing embrace of the water prison technique as the sphere of water solidified around him. Each breath pressed painfully against his lungs, threatening to snap his ribs. He choked back the urge to inhale, muscles tensing in the cold grip. Through the swirling currents, he caught sight of Hoshigaki Kasame's impassive face. Rain hammered against the barrier, distorting the silhouette, but Kasame's dark eyes bored into him. He must have expected the usual look of defeat, panic, remorse, desperation from any trapped shinobi. Instead, Kasame found none of that in Nathan's gaze. There was only steely confidence, bordering on pride. It wasn't an empty boast. When the rain first masked the water clone's approach, Nathan's vision had been obscured. But once they clashed, nearly a minute of parrying blades and swirling chakra, he dissected every move. The clone mimicked Kasame's signature style, yet betrayed itself with tiny imbalances. An overextended strike here, a wavering chakra release there. Most revealing was its energy pool, noticeably weaker than the genuine Hoshigaki Kasame. Nathan's survival instincts flared, sharpening his senses even now. He realized the clone's critical weakness. Its chakra would soon ebb, collapsing the very jutsu that bound him. Instead of fear, a calculated calm settled over him. He forced a slow, confident smile. The water tightened its hold, but in that suffocating silence, Nathan felt the tide turning against Kasame's ploy. He had read his opponent perfectly. Now all he had to do was wait for the moment the clone's chakra flickered, and then he would strike back. Nathan continued to feign ignorance. His only goal was to flush out his opponent's true form. Now he was certain the figure behind him was the real enemy. In other words, his ruse had worked. All that remained was to finish the job. He cast a quick, furtive glance at the Mist Village Shinobi and the Konoha ninja watching from afar. Satisfied they were too distant to discern details, he prepared to activate Heaven's Guard, vanish from sight, and seize Hoshigaki Kasame in one swift move. Just as he lifted his hand to awaken his Mangekyo Sharingan, a subtle chakra ripple pulsed through the seawater at his feet. In the corner of his eye, he caught a flicker of relief in Kasame's gaze. Could it be? A chilling suspicion struck Nathan. Without pausing for hand seals, he formed the large sphere Rasengan. Chakra coalesced in his left palm, blossoming into a vast pulsating orb. Instantly, it drew the surrounding seawater into a furious vortex, ready to crash down on his unsuspecting foe. Nathan felt as though he'd been transported back to the days when he used balloons to master the Rasengan, constantly gathering chakra in his body and funneling it into his palm. This time, he poured every ounce of strength into one decisive strike. With a thunderous bang, the surrounding water barrier shattered, torn apart by the force of the seawater it had contained. The water prison technique collapsed around him. He barely registered the urgency of drawing breath. With a single explosive push from his legs, he burst forward. In the next instant, a razor-sharp ice spear shot up from below. It grazed his back before hurtling skyward, clear proof that if he'd stayed still another moment, he'd have been impaled. Even if he'd activated his Mangekyo Sharingan and deployed the left-eye genjutsu Heaven's Guard to deflect the attack, he would have risked revealing his greatest secret. And while Heaven's Guard might have let him defeat, or even control, Hoshigaki Kasame, it wouldn't save him from facing both Kasame and Yukikaze at once. Splash! The water's surface split open, and a 2 to 3 meter shark leapt free, its dark form cutting through the waves like a torpedo. Nathan braced himself. The real battle was only just beginning. A massive shark surged forward, and from its gaping jaws, Yukikaze sprang free. Nathan's heart sank. This was the very shinobi who'd slipped through his fingers earlier, now in knell, eager with Hoshigaki Kasame, concealed deep inside Kasame's true summon, waiting to strike from within. He realized, in that instant, that the faint chakra ripple he'd sensed wasn't the shark's at all, but Yukikaze's wind and snow technique stirring in its belly. His reflexes saved him. Nathan halted the activation of his Mangekyo Sharingan just before it flared to life. Had he unleashed it even a moment too soon, the consequences would have been catastrophic. He met Kasame's cold stare and the equally aloof gaze of Yukikaze and felt a flicker of unease. Only moments ago, Nathan had taken comfort in believing he'd outmaneuvered Kasame. Now it was painfully clear the trap had been set for him. Perhaps Kasame hadn't anticipated Nathan's plan to capture him alive, but the instant Nathan resorted to the water clone technique, Kasame's shark had seen right through the deception. In the end, the powers of the Sharingan are no secret, and tonight, Nathan was reminded just how sharp its gaze could be. Nathan realized in an instant what his opponent was up to. Kasame must have noticed the tiny flaws in the water clone he'd created, and so, to lure Nathan in, he feigned ignorance. The ruse worked only as long as Nathan let it. The moment he took the bait, Kasame unleashed his water-style water prison technique, encasing him in a churning sphere of water. But Nathan had planned for this too. He'd held back his heavenly guardian jutsu as an emergency escape, confident he could shatter the prison from within and turn the tables on Kasame. Only one thing thwarted him: Shuifeng's sudden intervention. The disruption prevented Nathan from breaking free at exactly the right moment, and yet, without Shuifeng's cooperation, Kasame would never have given Nathan the opening in the first place. In the broader scheme of the tower fight, Nathan occupied the 3rd floor, while Kasame held the 5th, a precarious imbalance of power. Only Nathan's secret escape technique made any sort of rescue, or even a live capture, possible. Had he been trapped without it, the consequences would have been disastrous. But relying on that same escape also risked letting Kasame slip through his fingers, denying him the chance to capture his quarry alive. "Damn it," Nathan snarled under his breath as he stared down Xuefeng. He took a steadying breath and began to weigh his options. Hoshigaki Kasame was a brutal foe who demanded his full attention, and Xuefeng, though wounded in their last fight, looked fully recovered. Conservatively, Nathan estimated he still wielded 60 to 70% of his former power. Facing both at once would be a nightmare. As Nathan strategized, his opponents were doing the same. An uneasy silence settled over the battlefield, each warrior sizing up the others. Minutes ticked by. Then a sudden gust of sea breeze swept in, whipping the waves into frothy crescendos that crashed along the shore. In that instant, all three moved in perfect sync, stepping into fighting stances and locking eyes. Without any further words, they made their unspoken agreement. No tricks, no retreats. They would meet head-on. In a one-on-one fight, neither Hoshigaki Kasame nor Yukikaze alone could hope to overpower Nathan. Confident, however, that a 2-on-1 would tilt the odds in their favor, they struck simultaneously. Nathan remained completely unfazed. He commanded 3 swordsmanship disciplines, the level 4 instant sword technique, the level 6 illusion sword technique, and the level 7, 0-0, master sword technique. Admittedly, the instant sword technique posed little real threat to seasoned warriors like Kasame and Yukikaze, but the illusion and master sword techniques were each devastating in the hands of even an ordinary jonin. Unworried by their combined assault, Nathan raised his blade and met their attack head-on. Chapter 350. Retreating! Clang! Clang! Steel rang out in rapid succession as Nathan's blade met 2 opponents at once. He darted, parried, and struck with unerring precision, refusing to give even an inch. Minutes ticked by, each one more intense than the last, until 15 grueling minutes had passed in what felt like a heartbeat. At last, Kasame Inikisaki and Yukikaze staggered back, breathing hard. They stood a few paces from Nathan, weapons lowered, their eyes locked on his youthful face, still boyish, yet set with unwavering resolve. Each exchange had only confirmed what they already suspected. This boy was a prodigy. To survive a 1 versus 2 skirmish at his age, and not merely survive but hold his own, was nothing short of extraordinary. If Nathan lived through this war, he would surely become Konoha's future pillar of strength. Inside Kasame's heart, admiration warred with something darker, the urge to eliminate such a rival before he could grow too powerful. Yet, try as they might, neither Kasame nor Yukikaze had uncovered a true weakness in Nathan's defense. More precisely, they had found flaws, but lacked the means to exploit them. The boy's agility, instincts, and raw talent simply outmatched them. Breathing heavily, Yukikaze exchanged a glance with Kasame. Neither wanted to press on now, not against such an opponent, not in their current condition. After a long, tense moment, Kasame signaled a retreat. With disciplined steps, they fell back together, vanishing into the shadows from which they had emerged. Nathan stood alone in the clearing, sword still raised, chest heaving. He watched their silhouettes fade into the distance, uncertain whether to feel relief or anticipation. One thing was clear. This was only the beginning. Though the battlefield environment forces rapid growth, Nathan's combat experience still lags behind these 2 veteran jonin. Inevitably, small weaknesses have begun to surface. Yet every time they think they can exploit his mistakes, Nathan meets them head-on with sheer power and pushes back. That relentless counterattack is Kasame's greatest headache. Maybe it's time to risk everything. Kasame thought, casting a quick furtive glance at Yukikaze. He had hoped for a silent nod of agreement, a shared determination to press the assault. Instead, he found nothing but fear in her eyes. With her resolve crumbling, he knows she'll never fight with everything she has. Worse still, their orders from Kirigakure are explicit: delay Nathan's reinforcements, not annihilate them. So even if Kasame tries to goad Yukikaze into a full-scale attack, she can always hide behind the letter of their mission. It's the fatal flaw in the Bloody Mist policy. Without unified hearts, even the most ruthless edicts fall apart. Perhaps Kirigakure no longer openly persecutes the great bloodline clans, but their instinct for self-preservation hasn't waned. These families still guard their strength jealously. Take Xuefeng, for example. He'll accept assignments from the village, but he'll never give his life for Kirigakure, if it conflicts with his true priority, his family's legacy. He'll find any excuse he can to place his clan's future above a shinobi's duty. Kisame Inokaki treats Xuefeng as nothing more than a living weapon, yet he isn't blind. Watching Xuefeng's exchange with Yukikaze, he could read the other man's heart as plainly as if it were written on his sleeve. He knew Xuefeng's unspoken answer before a single word left his mouth. "Why?" Kisame demanded, voice low and dangerous. Stifling a sigh, Kisame set his mind on a second, decisive strike. He understood that killing Nathan today was unlikely, but half measures weren't in his nature. As he shifted to attack, a harsh cry split the air. An eagle swooped down from the distance, circled them twice, and let out another piercing shriek. Kisame froze, eyes snapping upward. In an instant, he recognized the bird's unmistakable form, and everything changed. This was the village's herald eagle. As soon as Nathan recognized the bird, he tuned into its cries and decoded their meaning. Messenger eagles weren't just airborne pigeons. They could convey simple instructions as well as physical messages. This one was announcing that the blocking mission was complete and ordering a withdrawal at the earliest opportunity. Before Inikisaki Kisame could react, Yukikaze, standing at his side, shouted, "Retreat!" She abandoned all pretense of a standoff and sprinted back toward the fierce clash between the Mist Shinobi and the Leaf Ninja. Kisame froze in place, eyes widening. "She's so direct," he muttered to himself. With Yukikaze gone, Kisame had no choice but to fall back as well. He cast a resentful glance at Nathan and prepared to withdraw, but Nathan wasn't about to let him slip away. Though he'd nearly abandoned any hope of capturing his opponent alive, the messenger eagle's arrival reignited his determination. Ignoring Yukikaze's departure, he lunged straight at Kisame, resolved to seize him before he could vanish. Kisame was about to fall back immediately, but when he saw the remaining Kiri shinobi massing just beyond the tree line, he changed his mind. Instead of retreating, he resolved to hold Nathan here for a few more moments, enough time for his comrades to get away. It was the perfect example of Kisame's contradictions. He could ruthlessly sacrifice allies to achieve a goal, yet he'd gladly put himself in harm's way to protect them. Such is the complexity of human nature. Their blades met again in a flurry of sparks. Clang, clang, clang. Without Yukikaze's timely support, the pressure on Kisame mounted sharply. Still, even under that strain, his reputation was well-founded. Though he stood little chance of overpowering Nathan in direct combat, it was equally unlikely that Nathan could deliver a fatal blow. Once his opponent shifted from attack to defense, every opening Nathan exploited became narrower. 5 minutes into the fight, Nathan's masterful swordplay finally scored 2 cuts across Kisame's chest. Yet both wounds were superficial, neither deep nor serious enough to slow Kisame's relentless defense. The young shinobi realized that wearing down his adversary would take far more than a few swift strikes. As Kisame watched the last of the Kiris ninjas slip free from the Konoha shinobi's pursuit and fall back toward Yukikaze, he knew he couldn't afford to linger any longer. But breaking away proved more difficult than he'd expected. The moment his intention to retreat flickered across his stance, Nathan pounced, pressing the attack and refusing him even a sliver of an opening. Behind Nathan, the remaining Konoha ninja converged, tightening the noose. From the corner of his eye, Kisame saw those reinforcements coming on. They might not be top-tier fighters, but they could buy Nathan enough time to mount a lethal counterstrike. Clenching his teeth, Kisame slammed Nathan aside with the haft of his sword, taking a blade wound in the chest to carve out some breathing room. Ignoring the pain, he whipped through the hand seals of his deadliest jutsu. "Water release, explosive water style," he roared. In an instant, a colossal sphere of churning water detonated into a roaring tsunami, surging outward with cataclysmic force. A thunderous roar split the air as Kisame unleashed a torrent of water from his mouth, a surging wave that barreled straight toward Nathan. Instinctively, Nathan dove beneath the crush of white water. Under the surface, he activated his Mangekyo Sharingan and summoned the Heavenly Guardian, an ethereal armor that let him withstand the crushing pressure, and propelled himself through the depths. Within seconds, he materialized at Kisame's feet. Breaking the jutsu with a single thought, Nathan broke the surface, sealed his Sharingan, and drove his blade into Kisame's back. There was no splash of blood, only the soft hiss of seawater dripping from the sword. In an instant, Kisame's body erupted into a swirling pool of seawater. As Nathan withdrew his blade, he spotted a massive shark flashing through the waves. It lunged, swallowed the watery remains in one gulp, then disappeared into the ocean's depths as silently as it had come. Chapter 351, Bad News. As expected, it still didn't work. Nathan watched the phantom shark dissolve into nothingness and muttered under his breath. A gentle whoosh of chakra signaled someone joining him. "Nathan, you all right?" came the familiar voice of Uchiha Tiehuo. He stood there drenched in blood, his expression as fierce as ever, but his vital signs were steady, proof he'd taken little if any real damage. Nathan realized most of that blood must belong to their foes. Tiehuo gave his chest a casual pat. "How could those puny brats lay a finger on me?" Nathan nodded. He'd sparred with Tiehuo many times and knew exactly how formidable his friend was. No ordinary jonin could match him. Although the Kirigakure blockade team was exceptionally strong this time, Nathan had already neutralized its two most powerful members, so he emerged unscathed. He glanced past Uchiha Ironfire and surveyed the survivors. Of the original 100, fewer than 60 remained standing, a grim indicator of how fierce the fighting had been. "Huh?" Nathan's brow furrowed. The two special jonin assigned to accompany him, both of whom had been openly hostile, were nowhere in sight. A few questioning words later, he learned that both had fallen on the battlefield. He shook his head in disbelief. He had indeed considered quietly eliminating those two, but never expected them to actually die. Shaking off the lingering shock, he refocused on the larger picture. Kirigakure's reactions suggested the enemy had accomplished their objective. Whether the northern defense line had been pierced or the raiding force had managed a safe withdrawal remained to be seen, and that question would demand his immediate attention. Their ship lies in ruins, and with it goes any hope of reaching the battlefield on time. After such a brutal engagement, everyone is utterly spent. There's no way they can push on without rest. Nathan inhales deeply, then makes a decision. 10-minute break, he orders. Then we move out and head straight for the northern defense line. He knows that, without fresh orders, sticking to the original plan is the least risky option. Let them call him a poor commander. Nathan couldn't care less. He's never enjoyed leading others. If he could, he'd gladly relinquish the role. But in the ninja world, strength speaks louder than strategy. His leadership may draw criticism, but his power is unquestioned. So long as he doesn't stray too far from the mission, he'll remain indispensable on every operation, just like this one. At the very least, whenever Nathan ran into an unexpected situation, he could lean on his sheer power to save more lives. If other jonin had arrived sooner, if they'd managed to drive off Kisame and his squad, the entire force might have held together. Thoughts like that flickered through his mind as 10 minutes slipped away. By then, everyone had patched up their wounds. With a quick nod from Nathan, they fell into line behind him and moved out. Their path diverged sharply from the route Shuifeng and his team had taken, which told Nathan everything he needed to know. Kirigakure's mission here was already accomplished. Had their true objective been an orderly withdrawal to the northern front, they would have headed north to reinforce the main assault, not vanish into thin air. I still don't know what Kirigakure's real goal is, he thought, but he didn't let it slow him down. He pressed forward, and the others followed close behind. The recent battle had claimed many lives, weeding out the weaker shinobi. As a result, the survivors moved more swiftly than Nathan had dared hope. About 2 hours later, Nathan and his team crested a low ridge and finally made out the coastline and the Konoha defensive lines. As he'd predicted, the fighting here had already ended. Only cleanup squads remained, gathering weapons and tending to the wounded. Their sudden arrival had sent a ripple of alarm through the camp. Many soldiers feared Kirigakure was mounting another assault. It wasn't until Nathan stepped forward, displaying his credentials, that the tension eased. Nathan was then escorted to the command post to meet the officer in charge of the northern defenses, Jonin Kurosawa Naruki. Naruki's face was grave as he rose to greet them. Before Nathan could ask after the men at the front, Naruki spoke. Our outpost in the Land of Waves, our forward base, has been breached by Kirigakure forces. Nathan's heart sank. He pushed back his chair and stood abruptly. What did you say? Our forward base was breached? Nathan stared in disbelief. Kurosawa Naruki gave him a solemn nod. Ambu has confirmed the forward base was breached. Almost every shinobi stationed there was wiped out. Nathan fought for composure, drawing a slow, deliberate breath. When did this happen? 2 hours ago. He felt his heart drop. 2 hours ago. That was exactly when Kasame and the others were pulled back. At the time, he'd assumed the enemy had been repelled, or perhaps even given up their northern advance. Now he realized he'd only half understood the situation. Kirigakure hadn't turned back. They'd struck the very outpost Nathan himself had left not long before. And they'd done it with deadly efficiency. Nathan remained silent for a moment, so Kurosawa Chengshu pressed on. Based on our intercepted intel, Kirigakure's true objective this time isn't us, it's the forward base. Nathan's eyes narrowed. So the raid on our flank and the blockade against your forces were mere feints? Exactly, Chengshu said. Their real goal has always been that base. Nathan nodded. The conclusion was obvious. When he'd led his squad away, over 200 troops still held the forward position. With its natural defenses, no sensible force would throw everything into an attack on a whim. Momentarily, he wondered whether things might have turned out differently had he stayed behind. He banished the thought almost as soon as it surfaced. He had no intention of walking into a trap. Kirigakure's attack this time had been faster and more precise than before. They'd clearly come fully prepared. Without unleashing the power of his Mangekyo Sharingan, he'd at best slow them down. There was no realistic way to defend the base under those odds. Nathan knew better than anyone that even the third Raikage, one of the strongest shinobi alive, could collapse from sheer exhaustion. If someone of that caliber could be driven to death by fatigue, what chance did he have? He shook his head, banishing the thought, and turned to Kurosawa Naruki. What's our next move? Their forward base lay in ashes, and the Kirigakure units that had threatened the northern defenses had already fallen back. With no outpost to hold and no enemy forces in sight, they were momentarily adrift, without orders, without a place to go. Chapter 352, Visit. Nathan stood before Kurosawa Naruki, watching the older officer weigh his options. After a moment's thought, Naruki spoke. The High Command doesn't even know you've shown up. Until we hear otherwise, you'll stay here. He paused, then offered with a half grin. Besides, we're short-handed on defenses. You and your team can pitch in. Nathan exhaled and nodded. They had nowhere else to go until orders arrived, so this made sense. Together, he and Naruki sketched out defensive sectors, assigned teams to watchtowers and checkpoints, and settled on patrol schedules. Once everything was set, they went their separate ways. Heading out of headquarters, Nathan took a moment to gather his thoughts. Then he made his way to the makeshift barracks where his men were billeted. As he stepped inside, silence fell. He didn't bother with preamble. Our forward base has fallen. The reaction was instantaneous. What? That can't be true. Captain, do we have confirmation? Speculation and alarm rippled through the room. For a few heartbeats, the men were caught in a storm of questions, until Nathan raised his hand for quiet and prepared to relay every detail he had. Nathan frowned and called out, Quiet! In an instant, the camp fell silent. He then relayed every detail Kurosawa Naruki had shared. His men stared at him in stunned disbelief, but no one spoke. Nathan stepped back and waited, giving them time to absorb the news. After a long moment, one of his lieutenants cleared his throat. Captain, what do we do now? Until we receive further orders from headquarters, Nathan said. We'll hold this position and secure our assigned sector of the defense perimeter. He went on to summarize the agreement he'd made with Naruki, then left them to hash out the deployment details. With that settled, Nathan turned to leave, but then he hesitated, as if remembering something important. He walked over to Uchiha Tiehuo and said, Come with me. Without a word, Tiehuo fell into step beside him, and together they departed the temporary camp. They strode through the dusk-lit outpost until they reached another encampment, where Uchiha Ironfire was already waiting. Nathan paused at the edge of the tents, took a deep breath, and prepared to share the next phase of their plan. Nathan stepped onto the field of white canvas tents emblazoned with red crosses, his gaze sweeping over rows of makeshift wards. Medic ninjas in crisp white uniforms moved from tent to tent, tending to the injured, their soft footsteps accompanied by the occasional groan of pain rising from within. "Tent hospital. The northern front?" Uchiha Tiehuo asked, his voice low as he glanced around. Nathan nodded. "Exactly. This is the temporary medical camp set up to treat the casualties from the northern defense line." Tiehuo's eyes widened. "So Kurosawa Jonin wants you to help patch people up, right?" "No," Nathan replied, shaking his head. "I'm not here to be a doctor today. I've brought you for a different purpose." Tiehuo stiffened, caught between surprise and curiosity. He knew Nathan as courteous and soft-spoken, yet cold and proud underneath. It was almost impossible to imagine him seeking out someone, much less bringing a companion along. "Who are we meeting, then?" A faint smile tugged at Nathan's lips. "You'll understand once we get there." With that, Nathan led the way past the rows of tents. They reached a larger pavilion near the back of the camp. Since they'd already announced themselves at the checkpoint, no one challenged their passage. Tiehuo watched Nathan's determined stride, anticipation building as they slipped inside the next tent, wondering what or who awaited them beyond its flaps. Nathan paused at the tent's entrance, waiting a heartbeat before stepping inside. A single cot stood against the far wall, its occupant a young Uchiha with a ghostly pallor and an IV drip feeding into his arm. He looked as though he'd been on the brink of death. Beside Nathan, Uchiha Tiehuo's eyes went wide. "Shisui?" he whispered. It was, as indeed, Uchiha Shisui. Nathan and Shisui had been deployed to the same battlefield, Nathan to the forward outpost, Shisui to the northern defense line. That sector had been thought secure until Kirigakure's forces struck without warning. Shisui had fought tooth and nail to hold the line, only to be singled out by the enemy and left critically wounded. When Kurosawa Naruki brought the news, Nathan had raced straight here. Tiehuo stepped closer. He and Nathan were known throughout Konoha as the Uchiha twins, a pair of prodigies whose skill was unrivaled in the clan, yet even their fame paled slightly beside Shisui's. Now, seeing him so broken, both couldn't hide the concern in their eyes. Tiehuo's eyes widened the moment he saw Nathan standing there. As a fellow Uchiha, recognition came naturally. "Nathan, what brings you here?" he asked. Shisui Uchiha, who had been surveying the perimeter, started at Nathan's sudden appearance. He opened his mouth to greet his old comrade, but Tiehuo cut in. "Hold on, who is this Shisui?" Shisui shook off his surprise and offered a polite nod. "This is Nathan," he said. "We served together at the same base." Nathan inclined his head in greeting, his expression calm. In his previous life's memories, Tiehuo and Shisui had been close, even trusted, so bringing them together now felt natural. Formal introductions dispensed with, Nathan turned to Shisui to discuss the real reason he'd come, a full exchange of intelligence. Shisui had already filled him in on the local situation, but Nathan's recollection went a step further. He hadn't forgotten how the Mist Shinobi had ambushed their support unit and broken through precisely at this location. Nor had he overlooked the information he'd extracted, rather aggressively, from Aburame Ryoma's mind. Root operatives had been coordinating that very ambush. With that knowledge in hand, Nathan couldn't help but regard Shisui with a measure of suspicion. And so, beneath the waning light, the three Uchiha fell into a careful negotiation, each man weighing what he knew and what he still needed to learn. Nathan needed to be absolutely sure, so he pressed Uchiha Shisui for precise details. They compared notes for over 10 minutes, scrutinizing every scrap of information. When he finally saw Shisui's eyelids drooping, Nathan knew it was time to stop. Their exchange confirmed that Shisui's condition was exactly as reported. No hidden complications, no outside interference. His injuries were simply the result of pushing himself to the limit in battle. Nathan allowed himself a quiet sigh of relief. If Danzo's influence here had been stronger, Shisui might have been manipulated or poisoned, but there was no sign of that. Before leaving, Nathan examined Shisui once more. The young shinobi was clearly spent, his chakra reserves all but exhausted, and any attempt at medical ninjutsu now would do more harm than good. "Rest well, Shisui," Nathan said, rising to go. "Recover at your own pace. We'll speak again once you're back on your feet." With a final nod, he slipped out, confident that his mission had succeeded. "Yeah." With a slight tilt of his head, Uchiha Shisui offered that curt reply. Nathan didn't hesitate. He rose to his feet and, alongside Uchiha Tiehuo, slipped out of the tent. Chapter 353. Promotion. 4 days had slipped away since Nathan's visit to Uchiha Shisui, and life in Konoha had settled back into an unremarkable routine. Each morning he woke early to train, spent the day honing his skills, and often traveled between training grounds. Missions, once a flurry of activity, had all but dried up. In the wake of the Hidden Mist Village's sudden capture of the forward base, they found themselves scrambling to fortify defenses rather than launch new raids on the Land of Fire's border. Konoha, meanwhile, was in no rush to reclaim the outpost. Both sides drifted into an uneasy calm. Nathan handed routine mission details off to the dozen or so shinobi under his command and devoted himself entirely to mastering new techniques. That afternoon, deep in the forest, Nathan settled onto a flat bluestone and assumed a meditative posture. He activated the reflection heart technique. Instantly, delicate filaments of chakra shimmered to life in his mind and flowed into his eyes, sending a tingling pulse through his skull. He clenched his teeth against the initial discomfort, centering his thoughts on each subtle shift within. As he sank deeper into concentration, Nathan carefully traced the currents of energy, determined to unlock the technique's next level. Nathan waited until the lingering glow of the reflection heart technique faded and his special chakra pool drained to zero. Without a moment's hesitation, he reformed the hand seal and unleashed it again. 1 surge, 2, 10, 20. An hour slipped by as the sun sank behind the mountain ridge and dusk crept over the valley. At last, Nathan opened his eyes, excitement sparking in their depths. He tapped his chakra scroll and read the numbers flashing before him. Reflection Heart Technique, Level 7, 19,999/20,000, had just climbed to Level 8, 150,000. After more than 4 days of relentless repetition, he'd finally broken through. A rush of exhilaration washed over him. His understanding of the technique had leapt to a realm far beyond the early, flawed prototypes once pored over by his Uchiha predecessors. This wasn't the half-baked illusion they'd struggled to refine. It was something entirely new, honed by Nathan's singular insight. If he unleashed it in full strength, every shinobi in the Uchiha clan would be left reeling. In the past, Nathan would never have dared to do something like this before achieving his current invincibility in the ninja world. Yet even now, he knew the old saying all too well: he who possesses a great treasure invites suspicion. If word ever got out that the Uchiha clan had discovered an illusion capable of unfolding the Sharingan, not only Konoha, but every other village would move to purge them. After all, the Mangekyo Sharingan's fearsome power was common knowledge among even modestly influential families. They would never allow the Uchiha's strength to grow unchecked, and if they suspected a threat, annihilation would follow. Determined to avoid that fate, Nathan locked the secret away in his heart. He drew in a steady breath, exhaled until his mind stilled, and gently closed the scroll before him. Then, positioning himself in the center of the training hall, he formed the hand seals with deliberate precision, as if encountering them for the very first time. He summoned chakra from his core and began the Level 8 Reflection Heart technique. Instantly, that familiar, prismatic chakra sprang to life and surged toward his eyes. A subtle electric buzz rippled through his optic nerves as the energy worked its transformation. For a minute and a half, Nathan remained motionless, his focus unshaken and his breathing steady. Then, with a final, controlled exhalation, he opened his eyes, and his world changed. Nathan reopened his interface and stared at the bloodline evolution bar for his Mangekyo Sharingan, 5,231 out of 50,000. The number hadn't budged since his last session. A twinge of disappointment pricked at him, but he banished it just as quickly. Level 8 of the Reflection Heart technique might no longer guarantee a full evolution point every time he used it, but it still offered progress far beyond his old routine. He drew in a steadying breath, closed the panel, and centered himself. The world beyond his mind's eye dimmed as he entered the reflective state. 2 complete cycles of the technique later, Nathan reopened the interface. The counter had crept up to 5,232, 1 point gained for 2 repetitions, an efficiency increase of 1/3 over level 7. A quick calculation followed. He needed roughly 45,000 more evolution points to master his Mangekyo Sharingan. At his current rate, 1 point per 2 uses, he'd require about 15 months of steady practice. 15 months, 1 year and 3 months. It was June now, so barring any setbacks, by next September he could finally trigger the full evolution of his Mangekyo Sharingan. With renewed resolve, Nathan closed the panel and readied himself for the long road ahead. Nathan stared at the figures swirling in his mind. By next September, his Sharingan could mature into the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, more than a month ahead of Naruto's projected timeline. Of course, that estimate assumed he continued to dedicate the same daily chakra quota to his heart reflection technique. If he boosted that investment and further compressed his body, strengthening sessions through the Palm Immortal technique, he could accelerate the schedule even more. He ran the numbers again in his head. At the current pace, once his Mangekyo Sharingan reaches a progression of 30,000 out of 50,000 points, the heart reflection technique will automatically upgrade to level 9. The enhanced technique would, in turn, hasten the evolution of his Sharingan, pushing the finish line steadily forward. Barring any major setbacks, his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan should be fully realized well before next September. Despite the certainty of his conclusion, a restless energy bubbled up inside him. Nathan sat motionless for what felt like an eternity, trying and failing to calm the excitement twisting in his chest. In the end, he could bear it no longer. Rising to his feet, he made his way across the training grounds to where his shadow clone was diligently honing its skills. Nathan had recently copied the water-style, Great Shark Bullet technique from Hoshigaki Kasame, just as he'd already mastered the skin extraction technique and the water-style Hidden Mist technique. But his chakra reserves were spread so thin he couldn't train them yet. For now, those jutsu would have to wait. On the training field, 6 of his shadow clones moved in perfect rhythm, each drilling a different skill. 3 focused on Wind-style, Wind-blade, Rasengan, and Wind-style, Rasen Shuriken. 2 more practiced water-style, Water Dragon Bullet technique, and water-style, Water Array Wall. The final clone alternated between the Illusion Sword technique and the Instant Sword technique. Nathan had pushed both his time and chakra to the very edge. He surveyed the disciplined flurry of activity with a satisfied nod, then returned to his original body and resumed the Reflection Heart technique. Though the endless repetition felt monotonous, seeing the proficiency gauge tick steadily upward with each run kept him driven. Nathan frequently rotated through different techniques in his training regimen. Today, it was the Palm Immortal technique. Before he'd left the forward base, he'd estimated that within 10 to 15 days, his body would reach a critical transformation point. Now, over 4 days into that countdown, the sensation of impending change had grown unmistakably clear. He was certain the breakthrough would come in no more than a week. When that moment arrived, he planned to channel human control to shatter his limits and trigger the transformation. His physique would strengthen, his chakra pool and recovery rate would swell, and he'd finally have the reserves needed to begin the fine injury extraction technique, the water escape mist hiding technique, and the water escape Great Shark Bullet technique. With these goals set, Nathan pushed aside all other thoughts and devoted himself entirely to the Palm Immortal technique, determined to fortify his body before the crucial day came. Chapter 354, Turning Point. Twilight was settling over the forest when Nathan finally sheathed his blade. He'd pushed himself for nearly 2 hours in the clearing, perfecting his stance, sharpening his reflexes, and now every muscle in his body felt alight with exhaustion. With a last glance at the dusky sky, he packed his gear and made his way back to camp. Before he'd even had time to sit, a soft knock rattled the flap of his tent. A Konoha Chunin stood in the doorway, posture rigid with urgency. Nathan frowned. "Do you know why Captain Kurosawa wants to see me?" The Chunin shifted uneasily. "I don't, sir. He just said you had to come immediately." Nathan let out a resigned sigh. He shouldered his sword, Kusanagi's familiar weight a comfort against his side, and followed the messenger out into the chill evening air. The lantern-lit path to the Northern Defense Headquarters was swarming with shinobi, more faces than he'd ever seen gathered here at one time, all moving with hurried purpose. A sudden knot of apprehension tightened in his chest. Something big was unfolding. He pushed the thought away and strode on. A few minutes later, he reached the row of guard posts and climbed the stone steps to Captain Kurosawa's office. Nathan rapped briskly on the heavy wooden door. "Enter!" came the familiar call from within. Nathan took a steadying breath and stepped inside, ready for whatever turning point awaited. Nathan didn't bother with formalities. He shoved the door open and strode inside. Captain Kurosawa Nariki looked up, his face drawn and tense. "What's happened, Captain?" Nathan demanded. Nariki sighed deeply. "Just now, Captain Narikeiko sent word that Shwange Town has fallen." Nathan froze. "What?" He paced the small office, voice urgent. "Are you sure it's Shwange Town in the Rain Country Theater of War?" "Absolutely," Nariki replied. "You came from there. You know better than anyone how vital Shwange Town is." Nathan's jaw tightened. He'd spent weeks there after the retreat from Fengliu Town, throwing himself into the defense of the Nishiyama stronghold and leading 2 strike teams against the invading Iwagakure forces. He'd fought alongside the 4-tailed Jinchuriki Laozi and the 5-tailed Jinchuriki Han. With that kind of power amassed, the town's loss was unthinkable, and its importance painfully clear. Nathan's gaze drifted over the battle map as a cold realization settled in. If Iwagakure captures this border town, Konoha will lose its last forward stronghold. With that gate gone, the stone village need only press straight south to threaten the Leaf's base camp in the Land of Rain. At that point, Konoha's defenses would be squeezed into a tight chokehold, its freedom of maneuver all but extinguished, while Iwagakure would choose the time and place of every engagement. Drawing on memories he'd never expected to recall, Nathan pieced together the enemy's next gambit. Iwagakure would dispatch an elite strike team to slip past the Rain border camp and raid the heart of the Fire Country itself. In his previous life, the shinobi assigned to this mission had gone by the ominous title Eastern Reaper. That phantom warrior had struck so swiftly and ferociously that the Leaf's garrison along that route was almost wiped out before help could arrive. Only the timely intervention of Namikaze Minato had turned back the tide, and even then, the stone ninjas had already ripped open a dangerous breach in Konoha's eastern defenses. Nathan's jaw tightened. If they didn't reinforce the town immediately, Iwagakure's next move would cut off Konoha's most critical lifeline, and the hidden Leaf would be trapped with nowhere to turn. Later, to force Iwagakure to fall back into a defensive posture and buy precious time for Konoha's frontline troops, Minato's squad was tasked with demolishing the famed Kanabi Bridge. What became known as the Battle of Kanabi Bridge would give rise to 2 new Sharingan heroes in Konoha, heroes whose valor would later cast long shadows over future tragedies. Seizing on the upheaval, Tsunagakure moved swiftly. They demanded a decisive engagement with Konoha and even offered their own champion, Scorcher Yakura, as a bargaining chip to secure an alliance with Kirigakure. Empowered by this shaky accord, the Mist Village threw its full might against Konoha's borders, shattering the defense line and pouring into the Land of Fire. In Nathan's memories of his previous life, it was at this very turning point that he opened all 8 gates, driving the feared 7 ninja swordsmen into retreat and giving rise to the 3 supreme treasures. But now, since 2 of those swordsmen lie dead, the sequence of events Nathan once knew is unlikely ever to repeat itself. But there was no denying that the chain of disasters set off by Shwangtown's fall spoke volumes about its strategic importance. It could easily be called the true turning point of the Shinobi World War. Nathan sat hunched in the camp's flickering lantern light, his mind racing through every fragment of memory he possessed. "Kurosawa Naruki, are you with us?" A voice broke the silence. Nathan looked up to find his comrade studying him curiously. "You've been awfully quiet. Something on your mind?" Nathan blinked, shaken from his reverie. He forced a casual shrug. "Sorry, just thinking. It's nothing." He couldn't possibly reveal the real reason for his distraction. It wasn't that he didn't trust Naruki, but explaining the origin of his uncanny insights would only raise questions he wasn't ready to answer. On the surface, everyone blamed the tragedy at Kanabi Bridge on Kakashi's team being overwhelmed and Minato Namikaze's failed rescue attempt. But Nathan, armed with memories from a past life, knew better. He understood that Obito Uchiha had been subtly manipulated by Madara Uchiha long before that bridge ever collapsed. In truth, the massacre had been engineered from the very start. Nathan's head spun as he pieced it all together. First, they'd manipulated Uchiha Obito into activating his Mangekyo Sharingan. Then they'd drafted the Kirigakure Anbu to stage Nohara Rin's death at Kakashi's hands. Beyond Uchiha Madara lurked the insidious Black Zetsu, an endless chain of deception, like a stack of Matryoshka dolls he dared not pry open. Rubbing his temples, Nathan turned to Kurosawa Naruki. When did this go down? Naruki met his gaze, expression grim. Just a few hours ago. And what about Captain Nara's response? Nathan pressed. Naruki reached into the drawer of his desk and withdrew a sealed mission scroll, passing it over. Captain Nara's latest orders. You and your squad are to reinforce our front line. Hold this defense line at all costs. Intelligence indicates the hidden mist village may strike without warning. Nathan broke the seal and unfurled the parchment. He'd been wondering why their deployment orders took so long to arrive. Now he understood why, and the weight of what lay ahead settled on his shoulders like armor. Commander Nara Chiguang had been closely monitoring the Rain Country battleground and the situation in Shuanghe Town. Its fall hadn't come out of nowhere. He'd expected some warning of an enemy push and was simply waiting for confirmation. If the town could hold, he planned to await Nathan's order before counterattacking Wave Country and reclaiming the forward base. Now, however, Shuanghe Town had fallen into the hands of Hidden Rock Village, and there was no longer any room for an advance. The mission had shifted from offense to defense overnight, and today's dispatch reflected that change. Nathan allowed himself a small smile as he broke the seal on his mission scroll. A defensive assignment suited him perfectly. He needed time to fortify his body and break through his physique attribute. He read the orders carefully, found everything in order, and tucked the scroll away. After a brief discussion to finalize their improvised plan, Nathan saluted Commander Nara Chiguang, bid him farewell, and departed to take up his new post. Chapter 355, Promotion. After leaving Kurosawa Naruki's office, Nathan didn't head straight back to his quarters. First, he called together his dozens of subordinates. He didn't mention the real reason they were here, Shuanghe Town, but simply relayed the official orders to garrison the area. Though they'd been on duty for several days, hearing a formal command finally put their minds at ease. With their morale bolstered, Nathan returned to his residence and quickly prepared a simple meal. Once he'd eaten, he launched into his evening training. Whether it was harnessing palm senjutsu to fortify his body or practicing the reflecting heart jutsu to advance his Sharingan, each discipline demanded considerable time. Daylight hours alone weren't enough, so he pushed his practice into the late hours. Fortunately, his proficiency panel tracked every little improvement, or he might never have survived this grueling Euro 7 regimen. And so the cycle continued, sunrise to sunset, sunset to sunrise, each day blending into the next as Nathan relentlessly pursued his goals. Another week had slipped by in the blink of an eye. Now, on a sun-dappled afternoon, Nathan stood alone in the heart of the forest. He'd just completed another grueling cycle of the Palm Immortal technique and pressed a hand to his chest, mind and body humming with cultivated energy. After a moment's pause, he opened his eyes and whispered, "It's almost done." He could feel it. His body teetered on the brink of a breakthrough, held back only by unseen shackles. For most people, breaking free from such restraint meant nothing more than time, plus the right lineage qualifications. But Nathan was no ordinary cultivator. He wielded the human control pupil technique, a rare method that let him guide his own evolution. Now was the moment to unleash it. With a deep breath, he activated his shadow clone technique. Instantly, the half-dozen clones he dispatched to this clearing, each practicing different hand seals and meditative drills, dissolved into swirling motes of chakra. They surged back toward him, merging into his form with the soft crackle of converging energy and carrying every scrap of training data, every muscle memory impression they'd collected. A shudder rippled through Nathan's body as chakra poured in. Thanks to the 19 points he'd invested in his spirit attribute, his mind remained lucid under the strain, even as his face drained of color. His vision blurred, then cleared, revealing the outlines of distant trees sharper than before. Deep within, he sensed the invisible bonds snapping, his body sliding past its old limits. At last, the fusion completed. Nathan stood straighter, breath steady, aura blazing with newfound power. The final barrier had fallen. A faint smile crossed his pale lips as he surveyed the forest around him. In that quiet grove, his transformation was complete, and a new chapter of his journey was about to begin. Nathan drew in a deep breath and let it out slowly, centering himself. Then he began to sift through his recent practice sessions and the memories they generated, converting each lesson into proficiency points on his panel. 15 minutes later, he opened his eyes. All the new experiences and recollections had been fully digested. "The next step is strengthening my body," he murmured. He closed his eyes again, took a moment to push his mind and spirit to their peak, and made sure the area was clear of any observers. Then he summoned his Mangekyo Sharingan. In an instant, the 3 Magatama pattern in his irises twisted into a dark, eclipsing sun. Nathan felt the raw power of his pupils thrum through him, intoxicating yet demanding perfect focus. Steadying himself, he activated the technique dwelling in his right eye. A rush of human control energy washed over his entire body. He felt as though every cell, every muscle fiber, was now under his command, ready to reshape itself at his slightest whim. Still, Nathan knew better than to be deceived by the rush. With his current mastery of ocular power, truly mold in his body at will remained beyond his reach. Nathan realized that even if his ocular power surged by 1 or 2 levels, it still wouldn't be enough. No matter how rapidly he accelerated his evolution, his body simply couldn't complete such a transformation in a matter of seconds, or even tens of seconds. Perhaps, once his Sharingan reached the level of the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, and he no longer risked blindness, he could attempt this feat. But for now, that prospect was out of reach. Shaking off his frustration, Nathan gathered his chakra and swiftly formed the hand seals for the level 8 Palm Immortal technique. A torrent of yang chakra exploded through his network of meridians, invading every fiber of his being. Guided by the method known as man's control, he forced his cells to reshape themselves, pushing past every hidden barrier that had previously restrained his physical evolution. In an instant, the unseen shackles around his body snapped away, replaced by an overwhelming rush of pleasure. It was as if he were immersed in a steaming hot spring. Warmth spread through his limbs, every nerve ending tingled, and he felt more alive than ever before. Nathan fought the urge to give in. With a single, decisive thought, he deactivated human control, closed his Mangekyo Sharingan, and then sat in silence, attuned to every shift within his body. Minutes passed, then half an hour slipped away, before he finally opened his eyes. A powerful pulse of vitality streamed through him, radiating outward until it settled into a steady, humming energy. Nathan felt his senses sharpen, his strength coalesce into a focused core. "Panel," he murmured inwardly. Instantly, the familiar curtain of pale blue light sprang to life, illuminating the proficiency interface before him. As data and stats flickered into view, Nathan knew he had transformed, and that the real test was only just beginning. Nathan's eyes lit up as the translucent panel, shimmering before him, updated in real time. His physique had risen from 16 to 17. He couldn't help the satisfied grin tugging at his lips. He scanned the rest of his new stats. Spirit, 19 chakra, 31,500, 3772. Sharingan Kaleidoscope, 5,231, 50,000, 5,950,000. His technique levels had improved across the board. Chakra Refining Technique, Level 5, 1,439, 5,000, 1,583, 5,000. Wind Escape, Level 6, 3,405 and 10,000, 4,725, 10,000. Wind Style, Rasen Shuriken. Level 4, 462, 2,000, 1,566, 2,000. Water Style, Water Array Wall, Level 4, 5, 954, 2,000, 3,345, 5,000. Water Dragon Bullet, Level 4, 5, 721, 2,000, 1,050, 5,000. Mist Hidden Level 1, 51, 200. Big Shark Bullet Level 1, 100. Shadow Clone Technique was edging forward too, 504 to 2,000, 785, 2,000, while Chakra Absorption sat at 4,355,000. Even his signature moves showed growth. Rasengan Elv 6 climbed to 4,865 10,000, Palm Immortal Technique Elv 8 to 6,954 for 50,000, and the Instant Sword Technique jumped from PV4, 1,100 spur 2,000 to PV5, 545,000. Other skills, Chakra Scalpel, Microscopic Extraction, Reflection Heart, Phantom Sword had all crept upward, proof that every drill, every spar, and every drop of sweat was paying off. Nathan closed the panel with a decisive nod. Each point gained was another step toward mastering the path he'd chosen, a path that would demand everything he had and then some. But today, at least, he could savor a small victory. Nathan could feel the effects of his enhanced physique immediately. First, his maximum chakra reserve had surged by 30,000 points, from 160,000 to 190,000. Second, his chakra regeneration rate had improved in two ways: natural recovery and the gains from his chakra refining technique. His body's natural regeneration increased from 96,000 points per day to 116,000, a 20,000 point boost. At the same time, his tougher constitution allowed him to run the chakra refining technique for 13 hours each day instead of 12. Since each hour of refining restores 2,000 chakra, that extra hour added another 2,000 points. In total, Nathan's daily recovery jumped from 120,000 to 142,000 chakra points. Nathan settled into a meditative stance and divided the influx of chakra into 3 distinct channels. He assigned 12,000 points to his water style, Great Samadan technique, a commitment that would raise his proficiency by roughly 80 points each day. Next, he dedicated 5,000 points to the water style, Mist Concealment technique, which promised an impressive 100-point daily gain. The final 5,000 points he invested in the Fine Weakness Extraction technique, enough, based on his preliminary tests, to boost that skill by about 60 points. The increase wasn't dramatic, but it was real progress. At long last, Nathan's jutsu were more than empty displays. Each would now serve a practical purpose in battle. He allowed himself a satisfied smile. This allocation of chakra marked a solid step forward in his training. Nathan scrolled through the status panel, first admiring the gains from his recent physical improvements. Then he shifted his focus to his chakra capacity. After nearly 2 weeks of intensive training, he'd unlocked even more hidden potential. His chakra limit had surged by over 4,000 points, jumping from 70,964 to 75,572. At first, Nathan was genuinely pleased by this leap. That is, until he remembered the absurdly vast reserves of Hoshigaki Kisame and felt a twinge of envy. But he quickly shrugged off the doubt. Kisame's chakra pool might be enormous, but it's essentially maxed out. Nathan, by contrast, is still growing. His secret weapon is the chakra refining technique, now mastered at level 5. Each hour he spends refining adds 32 points to his chakra ceiling. 13 hours of daily practice means a steady 416-point increase every day, nearly 12,480 points in a single month. As long as he keeps at it, there's no telling how high he can push his limits. Nathan's chakra reserves were swelling so rapidly that it was only a matter of time before he outstripped his opponent. Yet he felt no urgency. As long as his physique and spiritual attributes continued to climb, his potential would keep expanding. If he ever pushed his body to its current limits, his chakra pool would hit a hard ceiling and stagnate, just like it did for any ordinary shinobi. But with his unique human control pupil art, Nathan could shepherd both his physical and spiritual evolution at will. In his case, the usual talent cap was nothing more than a myth. Drawing himself back to the present, he turned his attention to the column of blood glowing before him. His Mangekyo Sharingan was already 1/10 of the way toward its next evolution, sitting at 5,903 out of 50,000 progress points. Nathan had a strong hunch that once he surpassed the 10,000 mark, his spiritual attribute would surge upward again. Nathan realized it wasn't as simple as gaining a few extra points. Once he reached the next milestone, his potential ceiling would rise again. A flush of excitement warmed him, but a quick mental calculation brought him back down. He still had nearly 6 weeks before that threshold. Until then, any further increase in his spiritual attributes was unlikely. That didn't mean his ongoing investment in evolving the Mangekyo Sharingan was pointless. Even setting aside the subtler benefits, like shoring up Suzanu's defenses, the extended duration of his Heaven technique alone made the effort worthwhile. Previously, Heaven had lasted only 10 seconds at a time. Now it stretched to about 16, more than a 50% improvement. Whether for launching attacks or making a swift escape, the added concealment and safety were invaluable. Nathan was more than willing to keep putting points into it. He shook his head, dismissing any lingering doubts, and turned his attention to the skill menu. There, he could see that the proficiency levels of several key abilities he'd been focusing on had climbed considerably. Satisfied, he leaned back and began planning his next move. Nathan glanced at his chakra control screen. His wind style, wind blade technique had just ticked up from 3,405 to 4,725 proficiency points at level 6, only 5,275 points shy of promotion to level 7. At his current training rate, he estimated it would take about 50 more days to reach the next tier. Level 7 was rumored to be the pinnacle for Windblade, and with it mastered, he might finally succeed in developing a flying ninjutsu. A month ago, on the road to the land of craftsmen, Nathan had toyed with the idea of using his wind chakra to lift himself off the ground. Back then, however, his elemental control and raw power were too limited, so he'd shelved the concept. But now, he stretched out his right hand. Drawing in a fresh stream of wind nature chakra, he condensed it into a swirling orb above his palm. The chakra spiraled with uncanny grace, like a tiny ethereal sprite dancing on the breeze. Nathan held his breath, eyes fixed on that compact cyclone of raw power. He let the orb hover a moment longer, gauging its strength and stability. If this was enough chakra and precision, he could attempt to leverage it for thrust, maybe even lift a foot off the ground. But if it fell short, he'd wait until his next breakthrough, the upgrade of wind style, Rasen Shuriken. That higher-level jutsu would deepen his attunement with wind chakra and sharpen his control. Nathan released a quiet sigh. For now, he'd focus on sharpening both techniques, Windblade and Rasen Shuriken, until the day he could reshape wind itself into wings. Then, nothing would keep him from soaring. After nearly 2 weeks of relentless training, Nathan's skill with wind style, Windblade has climbed from level 4, 462-2000, to level 4, 1566-2000. At this rate, he'll reach level 5 in no more than 5 days, and once wind style, Windblade breaks through its level 7 cap, he'll be knocking on the door of level 6, giving him a real edge in battle. Nathan lifted his head, staring into the vast blue sky. He whispered the word fly and let his mind drift. After a long moment, he shook himself back to the present and turned to assess his water style techniques. 2 weeks ago, Water Array Wall sat at level 4, 954/2000, and Water Dragon Bullet Technique at level 4, 721-2000. Now both have advanced to level 5. Water Array Wall is at 334-5000, and Water Dragon Bullet sits at 101-5000. That next rank will bring faster casting, higher output, and far greater versatility. He glanced at his sword arts next. The Phantom Sword technique stubbornly remained at level 6, but his instant sword technique has surged from level 4, 1100-2000, to level 5, 504-5000. With that upgrade, his close quarters combat skills have taken another leap forward. Everything is falling into place. In a matter of days, Nathan will be operating on an entirely new level, one step closer to mastery of both ninjutsu and kenjutsu. Nathan stared at the proficiency panel in awe. It truly was terrifying. Given enough time, his power would only keep rising, overwhelming every obstacle in his path. He wiped the corner of his mouth, where a trickle of blood had formed, and turned his attention to the 3 highest-ranking skills on his screen: Rasengan, the Palm Fairy technique, and the Heart Reflecting technique. Rasengan, just like Wind Style, Windblade, would need roughly 50 more days of practice to advance to level 7. The Palm Fairy and Heart Reflecting techniques were already at level 8, but pushing them any higher would be a grueling challenge. Earning the 50,000 proficiency points required wasn't something that happened overnight. "Take it slow," he muttered, closing the panel with a soft click. He drew in a deep breath, let it out, and centered himself. Then, with deliberate focus, he began to cultivate the palm fairy technique, pouring chakra through every fiber of his being to reinforce his body. Since his last transformation, when his physique attribute had spiked, the effect of the palm fairy technique on his muscles and bones had felt diminished. Nonetheless, it remained an 8th-level skill, and under the steady guidance of human control, Nathan could still enhance his physical form. He shut his eyes and listened to the subtle hum of energy beneath his skin. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden growth spurts or bursts of strength, but over and over he directed his chakra, refining it with precision. Tiny shifts in muscle density, a faint warmth around his joints, a more resilient sense of balance, each was a small victory. And as the hours passed, the accumulation of those small victories began to weave together into something far more formidable than before. Throughout the afternoon, Nathan devoted himself wholly to the palm immortal technique, channeling the yang-escaping chi through his body without pause. After nearly 100 uninterrupted cycles, he reached a clear conclusion. At his current rate of 240 sessions per day, it would take roughly 1 month to push his body past this next threshold. Whether that month seems short or long will depend entirely on what happens in the meantime. If things remain calm, a month will pass in the blink of an eye. If conflict erupts, it may feel interminable. With that thought laid to rest, Nathan packed his few belongings and made his way back to the encampment he called home. Chapter 57, Fulfillment. More than 2 weeks had slipped by in what felt like an instant, and now July had arrived. This afternoon, deep in a shaded forest glade, the clash of steel rang out. Moving toward the sound, Nathan emerged between the trees, his long sword flashing like a streak of moonlight. Across from him stood Uchiha Tiehuo, eyes burning red with the 3 Tomoe Sharingan as he matched Nathan's every feint and advance. Nathan's movements were a blur, as silent and unpredictable as a ghost slipping through the undergrowth. Time and again he vanished, only to reappear behind Tiehuo or to his side. Tiehuo braced himself, gripping a kunai in each hand, and blocked every strike with fierce determination. Ding-ding, clang, each collision rang sharper than the last. Pushing his Sharingan to its very limit, Tiehuo tracked Nathan's blade with unwavering focus. Yet holding a purely defensive posture against an opponent this fast could not last forever. 5 minutes in, Nathan sensed his opening. Drawing upon his mastery of the instant sword technique, he shifted the blade's trajectory at the last possible moment. Simultaneously, he wove the phantom sword technique into the attack, scrambling Tiehuo's senses and distorting his perception of where the strike would land. With a final, fluid motion, Nathan lunged, his sword point a blur, and pressed the tip of his weapon against Tiehuo's throat. The forest fell silent, save for the labored breathing of both warriors. Tiehuo's crimson eyes flickered with shock and respect as he felt the cold steel at his skin. Nathan's chest rose and fell steadily. "Yield," he commanded softly. "This ends now." Tiehuo's shoulders sagged in defeat. He dropped his kunai with a clatter and bowed his head. "I yield," he admitted, voice low but steady. Nathan sheathed his sword and stepped back, offering Tiehuo the slightest nod of acknowledgement. The afternoon light filtered through the canopy, bathing them both in a serene glow that seemed to promise a hard-won peace. In that quiet moment, Nathan felt the weight of his journey and the fulfillment of every trial that had led him here. Nathan stood motionless, the long knife's cold edge resting lightly against Uchiha Tiehuo's throat. Tiehuo froze in mid-stride, muscles coiled, unable even to blink. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, Nathan slid the blade back into its sheath, as though putting away a playful toy. Only when the knife was secured did Tiehuo dare to exhale. He set aside his kunai, ran a hand through his hair, and sighed. "Seriously, Nathan," he said, half laughing. "What have you been doing lately? I've been training non-stop, yet you keep pulling further ahead. What's your secret?" Nathan offered him nothing but a faint smile. What could he say? "Sorry, man. I've been cheating," would hardly set the record straight. Yes, the enhancement panel had given him a boost, but every ounce of improvement reflected his own sweat and effort. The panel's role had been minimal at best. Fortunately, Tiehuo wasn't really angling for an answer. He was teasing, not investigating. Had he truly suspected Nathan of foul play, he would have banished him to the Pure Land ages ago. Instead, he simply threw Nathan a wry grin and picked up his kunai again. Nathan mirrored the grin, sheathed his knife fully, and gestured toward the training grounds. "Come on, let's go again," he said. "I want to see how much closer you can get." Tihuo laughed, shook his head, and moved into stance. The gap between them might have widened today, but tomorrow was another chance, and in Nathan's mind, a friendly rivalry was all the motivation he needed. Nathan guarded that secret panel like a treasure, second only to his time travel ability in terms of value. He'd never forgive anyone who tried to pry it from him. As he pondered this, Uchiha Tihuo slipped up beside him, voice hushed with urgency. "Nathan, have you heard the rumor about Kakashi?" Nathan raised an eyebrow. "What rumor?" Tihuo glanced around before whispering. "They say Kakashi, Minato's former student, has had one of our clan's Sharingan implanted." Nathan's heart skipped. Everything was unfolding just as he'd seen in his previous life. The Hidden Rock Village had indeed bypassed Konoha's base in the Land of Rain and sent an elite raiding party across the fire border. The local defenses were nearly wiped out before 4th Hokage Namikaze Minato arrived and drove back the invaders. But Minato's intervention only delayed the inevitable. The Rock Shinobi pressed on, threatening to break through entirely. To buy precious time for troop mobilization, Konoha's leadership decided on a decisive strike: destroy Kanabi Bridge, the vital supply line linking Iwagakure to the front. 1 week earlier, under the cover of multiple diversionary teams, Minato Namikaze's squad had slipped into the Iwagakure-held territory and made their way toward Kanabi Bridge. Nathan hadn't witnessed the battle firsthand, but he knew the outcome matched what he'd remembered from before. Uchiha Obito had sacrificed himself, and, honoring his final request, Nohara Rin had transplanted Obito's eye into Kakashi. The newly awakened Sharingan manifested not only in Kakashi but in a second shinobi as well, and word of these twin heroes spread like wildfire. Just the morale boost Minato needed. Even at a distance, Nathan had heard the whispers. But was everything truly settled? Frowning, Nathan turned to Uchiha Tihuo. "I've kept up with the Kanabi Bridge mission and the Sharingan transplant. What's wrong?" Tihuo glanced around to make sure no one else was listening, then lowered his voice. "Some members of our clan aren't pleased that Kakashi's wearing Obito's eye. They believe it should be returned to the Uchiha." Nathan's heart skipped a beat. The pieces fell into place, and a chill ran down his spine as he realized the conflict that now lay ahead. Nathan paused to weigh the situation. The Hyuga had taken every precaution to keep the Byakugan's secrets safe, so why would the equally proud Uchiha clan casually let their legendary Sharingan fall into outsiders' hands? Even if Kakashi swore that Obito Uchiha himself had voluntarily passed down the eye, the skeptics in the clan wouldn't be easily placated. Unsurprisingly, voices within the Uchiha were already demanding its return, but Nathan knew their protests would never gain real traction. In his previous life's memories, more than 10 years later, Kakashi was still wielding that very Sharingan. And with Minato Namikaze standing guard over him, no one in the village dared challenge his right to it. Once it was established, as it would be, that Obito had gifted the eye of his own accord as his dying wish, and considering how the village needed heroes now more than ever, the Uchiha would have to swallow their pride. Could they really risk earning the reputation of persecuting a war hero? Of course not. Besides, though Hadake Sakue had fallen in battle, his legacy as the White Fang of Konoha still carried immense weight. With his name still commanding respect in every corner of the village, any attempt to undo Obito's final act would paint the Uchiha in an even harsher light. In the end, Nathan was confident. The Sharingan was here to stay. For a variety of reasons, none of the clan members would openly oppose Kakashi, yet behind the scenes, they'd be bending over backwards to help him. Under those circumstances, the Uchiha really stood no chance of recovering that eye. Uchiha Tihuo, unaware of Nathan's inner reservations, shrugged and said, "Honestly, it's just an eye. Obito already entrusted it to him. What more do you expect us to do?" He paused, then added, "Besides, without Uchiha blood, Kakashi can't even tap into its full power. There's no sense in resenting him over something he can't fully use." Nathan stared at him, surprised. He'd assumed Tihuo would side with the hardliners on this issue, but instead, he'd spoken with surprising clarity. It was true. The Sharingan, severed from its Uchiha lineage, would always be handicapped in the hands of an outsider. Clinging to the idea of reclaiming it now seemed more than impractical. It was downright foolish. This decision would preserve the Uchiha clan's prestige as one of Konoha's wealthiest families and send a clear warning to anyone tempted to covet their Sharingan. Yet it would also risk breeding widespread resentment. After all, the Sharingan in question was taken from a village war hero, not some outsider. Few would rally behind the Uchiha in demanding its return. On the other hand, relinquishing the claim would win the clan immense goodwill, painting them as generous and fair. When you weigh the two options, the choice is obvious. In his previous life, Fugaku Uchiha must have reached the same conclusion. He quashed dissent within the clan and dropped the case. Nathan's suspected history would simply repeat itself. Uchiha Tiehuo shifted uncomfortably and hurried to cover his misstep. "Nathan, do you really dissent?" Nathan shook his head. "No, you're right." Tiehuo pressed on. "Then you don't believe the clan leader will go along with their demand, that he'll willingly give up the Sharingan?" Nathan's voice was calm but unwavering. "No, he won't." Tiehuo frowned. "Why not?" "Because," Nathan said quietly, "if it's obvious to you, it's obvious to him." He paused, his gaze drifting away, as if seeing a whole battlefield in his mind. Then he raised his hands, fingers weaving into the Ren seal. With a deep breath, he called forth his ninjutsu, shadow clone technique. In an instant, the air around him shimmered and darkened. Dozens of Nathans, perfect replicas down to every crease in his forehead, flickered into existence, their forms solidifying in the courtyard's dim light. Tiehuo stared in stunned silence as the real Nathan eyed him coolly, ready for whatever came next. Chapter 358. Huge improvement. With a thunderous boom, a swirl of chakra smoke exploded outward, then dissipated, revealing 9 identical Nathans standing in the clearing. Including the original, there were now 10 of him in total. Uchiha Tiehuo watched them warily from the sidelines, envy and curiosity warring in his dark eyes. Nathan gave a quick, crisp nod. "All right, everyone, pair up for training. Each of you will focus on a different technique." He pointed to 8 of the shadow clones and assigned them each one jutsu. 1. Wind Release, Wind Blade. 2. Wind Release, Spiral Shuriken. 3. Water Release, Water Wall. 4. Water Release, Water Dragon Bullet Jutsu. 5. Water Release, Kirigakure no Jutsu. 6. Water Release, Shark Bullet Technique. 7. Rasengan. 8. Art of Extracting Small Trouble. "Practice those moves until they're flawless," Nathan instructed. One by one, the 8 clones melted away in puffs of smoke, scattering across the field to begin their drills. That left just one clone, standing beside Nathan. He turned to Tiehuo with a casual smile. "If you want to spar next, you can take on him." Tiehuo hesitated, glancing at the motionless clone. "If you insist," he said at last, forcing a reluctant grin. There was a flicker of respect in his eyes. At least, he wasn't demanding the real Nathan's attention. Nathan allowed himself a satisfied smirk. Good. It was far safer for all parties if Tiehuo tested himself against a clone rather than the original, especially now, while Nathan's new techniques were still raw. He folded his arms and watched as the two prepared to clash, the final smoke circles of his dispersed clones still drifting in the air. Nathan considered the situation coolly. He and Ironfire got on well enough, but not well enough for him to abandon his own training plan just to spar exclusively with a friend. He'd already given Ironfire plenty of face by confronting him personally in battle. From now on, letting a shadow clone handle the sparring wouldn't be dishonorable. If anything, it'd accelerate the improvement of his phantom sword technique and instant sword technique, and Ironfire would gain real combat experience in the process. It was a win-win, with no one owing the other anything. Besides, Nathan's shadow clone carried over 8,000 chakra points. Ironfire might struggle to defeat it, so the practice would still be worth his while. With that settled, Nathan waved his hand and said, "All right, you two, go find a place to spar." At his cue, the shadow clone melted into the trees. Ironfire bowed in acknowledgement, then followed the clone into the training grounds. Nathan watched the two figures vanish into the distance, then shook his head and made his way to a nearby clearing. There, he settled himself and began the Palm Immortal technique, channeling his will into every fiber of his body. For more than half a month, he labored without pause, Day and night, he refined his muscles and bones, pushing relentlessly toward that elusive threshold of transformation. As he poured a sphere of yang chakra into his core, Nathan closed his eyes and let the energy settle within him. In the blink of an eye, another fortnight slipped by. One evening, back inside his room, Nathan resumed the Palm Immortal sequence and hit a wall. An unseen shackle pressed against his growth, blocking any further advancement. Frustration flickered in his chest, but he kept his face calm. "It's almost time," he murmured. With that, Nathan's eyes snapped open. He activated his Mangekyo Sharingan, the crimson tomoe swirling in both irises. Then he unleashed the human control technique in his right eye, drawing its potent blessing down through his body. Instantly, a rush of euphoria bloomed in his mind, each pulse promising newfound power. For a moment, he reveled in the sensation, fully aware that the real test of his limits was yet to come. Nathan blinked as clarity returned to his mind. He centered himself, hands moving swiftly through a series of seals. With a focused exhalation, he unleashed the ninjutsu, palm senjutsu. A surge of potent yang chakra streamed into his body, racing along every meridian. Calling on his rare human control ability, Nathan channeled the incoming energy to reinforce his physical form. Instantly, the invisible shackles that had been stifling his growth shattered. He felt an internal release, as though every muscle unwound and relaxed. Wasting no time, Nathan steeled his will and guided the newly liberated chakra toward perfecting his transformation. Minutes ticked by, 1, 2, 10, 20, until half an hour had passed in the blink of an eye. At last, the process was complete. Nathan opened his eyes and savored the sensation. His body tingled with vitality, as if he'd just emerged from a scorching hot spring. He rose to his feet and tested his strength with a flurry of punches. Each blow sliced through the air, stirring up a sharp gust of wind. He smiled. His power had grown, and so had his speed. Nathan knew he'd broken through yet another barrier on his path to mastery. Another benefit of his enhanced physique attribute was a dramatic boost in nerve signal speed. Even without activating his Sharingan, Nathan could clearly make out the rapid flutter of mosquitoes' wings in the room. He drew a kunai from the pouch at his waist, pressed its blade to his left forearm, and let out a crisp slice. Blood welled at once, but he clenched his teeth and quelled any outward reaction, focusing intently on the wound. 1 second, 2 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. Back when his physique stood at 14, a similar cut took 7 or 8 minutes before the edges even began to knit together. Now, with his physique at 15, the gash visibly closed in under 5 minutes. A triumphant grin spread across Nathan's face. His regeneration still fell short of Senju Hashirama's legendary Muji healing, but today marked unmistakable progress. He was certain that, as his physique attribute continued to rise, his self-healing would soon match, or even surpass, that famed ability. Nathan focused his mind and silently called, "Panel." In an instant, the familiar pale blue interface sprang to life before him, displaying his proficiency statistics with crisp clarity. Nathan felt a familiar tingling deep in his bones as his body shifted once more. Opening his proficiency panel, he watched the numbers adjust almost effortlessly. Age 12 physique, 18 up from 17, spiritual power 19, chakra reserves 88,052 up from 75,572, Sharingan 8,783 50,000 up from 5,903. Skills and mastery levels. Chakra refining technique, level 5, 1,973 5,000. Wind style, wind blade level 6, 8,100 10,000. Wind style Rasen Shuriken, level 5, 2,326 5,000. Water style, water array wall, level 5, 850. Water style, water dragon bullet technique, level 5, 3,600. Water style, mist hiding technique, level 4, 1,651 2,000. Water style, big shark bullet technique, level 4, 701 2,000. Shadow clone technique, level 4, 1,535 2,000. Chakra absorption technique, level 5, 4,350 5,000. Rasengan, level 6, 8,170 10,000. Palm immortal technique, level 8, 14,154 50,000. Chakra scalpel, level 5, 2,200 5,000. Microscopic extraction technique, level 4, 101 2,000. Heart Reflection Technique, Level 8, 7,105, 50,000. Phantom Sword Technique, Level 6, 4,550, 10,000. Instant Swordsmanship, Level 5, 495,000. Chakra Control, Level 5, 3,230. Scanning the list, Nathan allowed himself a small smile. His physique had finally climbed to 18, just 1 point shy of his spiritual power. Everything was falling into place. Nathan could feel, deep in his bones, that his spirit and body had never been so perfectly attuned. This latest rise in his physical constitution attribute delivered rewards far beyond anything he'd experienced before. First, his theoretical chakra limit jumped by 50,000 points, vaulting from 190,000 to 240,000. With only 88,052 points tapped so far, he still had an immense reserve to draw on. He wouldn't be close to exhausting his potential anytime soon. Second, his chakra recovery rate had surged. After careful testing, Nathan estimated he now regenerated about 146,000 chakra points per day, 30,000 more than just a month ago. By comparison, when he last advanced from 16 to 17 in physical constitution, he'd only gained 20,000 extra points. This 30,000-point leap underscored how significant his current breakthrough truly was. Finally, the daily window for practicing his chakra refining technique had lengthened by 2 full hours. Where he once trained 13 hours straight, he could now refine his chakra for 15 hours each day. Each of these improvements, capacity, recovery, and training time, fell neatly into place, marking a new milestone in Nathan's relentless pursuit of strength. By boosting his daily chakra recovery by an extra 4,000 points on top of the 30,000 he naturally regenerates, Nathan now had 34,000 chakra to spend each day. He refused to let a single point go to waste. He scanned his skill panel, eyeing the Palm Immortal technique and the Reflection Heart technique. If time weren't an issue, he'd funnel every bit of chakra into mastering those formidable jutsu. Unfortunately, both techniques demanded lengthy practice sessions, and their chakra slots were already maxed out. He simply didn't have the hours to train them any further today. After weighing his options, Nathan split his available chakra between 2 wind techniques. 14,000 points went to Wind Style, Wind Blade, and the remaining 20,000 to Wind Style, Rasen Shuriken. That raised his total chakra allocation for Wind Blade from 10,000 to 24,000 points, and for Rasen Shuriken from 14,000 to 34,000. With these boosts, he would earn 280 proficiency points per day in Wind Blade and 220 points per day in Rasen Shuriken. Solid progress toward mastering both jutsu. Nathan's Wind Style. Wind Blade has reached level 6 with 8,100 out of 10,000 experience points, and his Wind Style Rasen Shuriken sits at level 5 with 2,326 out of 5,000. At this pace, he'll push Wind Blade to level 7 in about a week, and just a few days after that, Rasen Shuriken will follow. Once both skills hit their next ranks, he'll finally qualify to begin learning flying ninjutsu. That's precisely why Nathan poured the 34,000 newly acquired chakra points into these 2 techniques, to meet the prerequisites for flight as quickly as possible. Chapter 359, The Gathering Storm. 4 days passed in the blink of an eye. It was late July, and this afternoon Nathan was still deep in the forest. Seated cross-legged on a weathered boulder, he had been rigorously practicing the Palm Fairy technique, striving to fortify his body. Progress, however, was agonizingly slow. Even if he managed to raise his physique attribute to 18 points, he estimated it would take at least 6 more weeks to complete the transformation, longer if he hit any setbacks. Only an upgrade from level 8 to level 9 in the Palm Fairy technique could significantly speed things up. Otherwise, he was left with nothing but steady, unyielding grind. Nathan opened his proficiency panel. The Palm Fairy technique hung at level 8 with 15,234 of the 50,000 experience points needed for the next tier. He exhaled and shook his head at the daunting gap. "I guess it really will be slow and steady," he muttered. Just as he settled back into his meditation, a warm current of chakra surged through his body. At the same moment, a cascade of past training experiences and memories flooded his mind, as if the technique itself were imprinting new insights deep into his subconscious. Nathan closed his eyes and quietly absorbed the flood of new experiences and memories, steadily converting them into genuine skill. After a moment, he opened his eyes, a spark of joy lighting them. With a swift motion, he formed the hand seals and unleashed his ninjutsu, water-style, mist concealment technique. Chakra surged from his core, and in an instant a thick white mist rolled outward, blanketing a full 100-meter radius. Just as quickly, the mist dissipated, revealing the landscape unchanged. The ease and fluidity of his release spoke volumes about his mastery. In fact, thanks to the recent infusion of training data and memories, Nathan's water-style, mist concealment technique had advanced to level 500, achieving perfection. A wave of exhilaration banished the heaviness he'd felt moments before, filling him with renewed hope. Yet even in his excitement, Nathan's mind turned to the next challenge, precisely how he would allocate his chakra moving forward. Nathan stared at the skill interface. Now that he'd mastered the water-style, mist concealment technique, 5,000 chakra points lay waiting to be reassigned. He let his gaze drift over the list of unlocked jutsu until it settled on the water-style giant bubble barrage. An A-rank ninjutsu with unlimited uses, it was exactly the kind of versatile technique he needed in his arsenal. At present, Nathan had it leveled to only 4. Against weaker opponents it packed a punch. Against equals, however, it was easily avoided, unless employed as a complete surprise. If he wanted this jutsu to live up to its rank, he'd have to speed its growth. By investing all 5 chakra points here, he could boost his daily proficiency gain from 80 to 1 in 10, shaving crucial days off the time it would take to reach the next tier. "All right," he said, confirming the allocation. "Let's do it." With that decision made, Nathan closed the panel and centered himself. Drawing breath, he reached out with his chakra, coaxing moisture from the air. He shaped it into a single enormous sphere, feeling its weight, its force. Again and again he practiced, refining each launch and focusing his energy into the core of the bubble. Minutes ticked past. An hour slipped away. Sweat beaded on his brow, but his spirit never wavered. With each repetition, the bubble grew more substantial, more stable, a sure sign that the extra chakra investment was paying off. Time blurred around him as he delved deeper into the technique, determined to unlock its full potential. Nathan sat cross-legged in the clearing, the morning mist curling around him as he delved deeper into his cultivation. Suddenly, the soft hush of wind through the trees was shattered by the rapid clip-clop of approaching footsteps. His eyes snapped open, and he inhaled sharply, scanning the tree line. Within moments, a familiar figure burst into view. Uchiha Tie, Uo, his expression grave, cloak fluttering behind him. Nathan rose to his feet, concern knotting in his chest. "Tihuo," he called, "what's wrong?" Tihuo drew in a steadying breath. He'd been handling the clan's affairs in Nathan's absence, and by now he should have wrapped up his mission and taken a well-earned rest. Yet here he was, racing back through the forest in a dead run. "Nathan," he said, voice low but urgent, "the hidden mist village has made their move." At once, Nathan's eyes narrowed. He straightened, every bit the strategist. "Explain everything," he demanded. He wasn't being paranoid, far from it. The mist had remained suspiciously quiet for the past month, and Nathan knew all too well how swiftly a calm can shatter into betrayal. Now, he braced himself for whatever storm was about to break. As the Third Great Ninja War approached its climax, every front line was about to be tested. The hidden mist village, long content to watch from the shadows, had clearly spent these past weeks preparing for a decisive move. Now that they'd struck, caution was more important than ever. Nathan stood over a sprawling map illuminated by lantern light in the war tent. Across from him, Uchiha Tihuo folded his arms and cleared his throat. "Commander," Tihuo began, "this afternoon the 3rd Squad was on a routine coastal patrol when they spotted a team of mist ninjas scouting from the shoreline. The moment our men made contact, the enemy withdrew." He flipped through his notes. "After I got back, I immediately debriefed the other units. Since midday, every patrol along our defense line has reported fleeting sightings of mist shinobi." Tihuo's voice grew more serious. "These probes aren't isolated. They're spread out across the entire perimeter, testing our fortifications, looking for weak points." Nathan studied the map, noting the clusters of reports dotting their coastal defenses. He drew in a steady breath. "Tihuo," he said quietly, "it looks like they're gearing up for a full-scale assault." Tihuo nodded grimly. "Yes, sir. If they've already mapped out our vulnerabilities, the next strike could come at any moment." Nathan pressed his fingertips together, eyes fixed on the tendrils of ink that marked enemy movements. Outside the tent, the hushed murmur of officers and the distant clash of training weapons reminded him that every second counted. "We'll reinforce the most critical points immediately," Nathan decided. "Mobilize the reserves along the northern ridge and increase reconnaissance patrols at dawn. I want full reports on any unusual activity." Tihuo bowed sharply. "Understood, Commander. We'll be ready." Nathan offered a tight nod. "This war isn't over yet. We'll hold our line, no matter what the Mist Village throws at us." He stood and rolled up the map, determination hardening his features. The final battles of the Third Great Ninja War were nearly upon them, and Nathan would see his side through the storm. "I think the Mist Ninjas are holding back their real strength for now." "Yeah," Nathan nodded in agreement. He suspected the hidden Mist Village had already struck a deal with the Sand Village, signing a peace treaty in return for whatever concessions they'd negotiated. Once their pact was secure, the two villages would undoubtedly marshal every last shinobi for a full-scale assault on the Leaf. By contrast, Konohagakure didn't seem eager to plunge into an all-out war just yet. From the rumors circulating in the capital, Nathan reckoned the Leaf's strategy was to settle things with the Sand Village first, winning a decisive victory there before redirecting its forces against the Hidden Rock and Hidden Mist. Even if the Leaf didn't unleash its entire arsenal, his memories from a past life told him it would still count as a clear triumph. Sure enough, the Sand Village would be the first to sue for peace, and later, when the extremist faction in the Rock Village tried to sabotage the negotiations, the Leaf would step in preemptively to smash their conspiracy and guarantee a smooth end to the war. Although the peace treaty with the Sand Village ostensibly served their interests, the fact that the fourth Kazekage, Rasa, had personally come forward underscored Konoha's true dominance in the agreement. Of course, that dominance would later pave the way for the Sand Village's unwitting role in Orochimaru's scheme to bring about Konoha's downfall. A swirl of possibilities flashed through Nathan's mind. He shook his head, banishing thoughts of unmade plans and distant betrayals. Right now, all he cared about was when Kirigakure would strike, and just how long these calm days might last. Before he could dwell on it any further, a messenger Chunin appeared at his side. "Nathan, Uchiha Tihuo," he said, bowing respectfully. "The village is calling you both to headquarters immediately. Don't get too comfortable. Those peaceful days are over." Nathan exchanged a glance with Tihuo, his mouth going dry. He managed a curt nod, then fell in step beside his comrade. Together, they hurried toward the heart of Konoha, uncertainty hanging heavy in the air. Chapter 360, Eagle's Beak Cliff. "Nathan, Tihuo, over here!" At the command post conference room, a familiar voice called out just as Nathan stepped inside. He looked up to see Uchiha Shisui seated at the table. Though Shisui's injuries had long since healed, they still served in different defense sectors, so their paths rarely crossed. Shisui threw himself into every assignment with relentless dedication, quite the opposite of Nathan, who often delegated routine tasks to his team. Nathan's partner, Uchiha Tihuo, was more sociable. Thanks to the frequency of their missions together, the two had developed an easy rapport. Without waiting for an invitation, Tihuo gave Nathan a friendly nudge toward an empty chair. Nathan smiled, took his seat, and the three of them leaned in to talk quietly. Tihuo and Shisui took the lead, discussing recent patrols, shifting strongholds, and the latest intelligence reports. Nathan listened attentively, offering only brief responses when asked. He trusted that Tihuo and Shisui had covered every important detail. This meeting was as much about strategy as it was about maintaining the tight bond between their defense teams. Minutes slipped away inside the secluded room. By the time the clock on the wall ticked past 30, the trio had mapped out their next moves and ironed out the last uncertainties. Emerging from the conference, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead on Eagle's Beak Cliff. As the last delegates took their seats, Kurosawa Naruki, entered the conference room. Unlike the forthright Uchiha Kazuo at the forward base, Naruki favored a more formal approach. He paused to exchange polite greetings, obliging Nathan's impatience with a warm but leisurely smile. Although Nathan thought the small talk a needless delay, no one spoke up, and he settled back to wait. After nearly 15 minutes, Naruki set aside his pleasantries. His expression sharpened as he positioned his notes and addressed the room. "I'm sure you've all heard that. Since noon today, our patrol teams have discovered traces of mist ninja activity." A ripple of whispers swept across the table. Naruki rapped his knuckles on the polished surface until the murmurs faded. Then he met everyone's eyes and continued in a measured tone. "This report is accurate, but there's more I must share. Intelligence reports confirm mist ninjas have been spotted not just along our northern defenses, but on the central and southern lines as well." Captain Kurosawa Nariki looked around the war room. "What does that tell us?" Special Jonin Tachikawa rose from his seat. "It means the hidden mist village has finished probing our forward outposts and is gearing up for a second assault." Another officer chimed in. "Exactly. They're conducting preliminary reconnaissance. We need to beef up patrols immediately and stop their scouts before they get any closer." A third added, "We should also establish ambush points at key choke points along their likely routes." The room buzzed with suggestions. After a moment, Captain Kurosawa held up his hand for silence. "Thank you for your input," he said. "From now on, every mission must proceed with extreme caution. Expect sudden, stealthy attacks. The mist excels at them. Stay alert and watch each other's backs." A chorus of agreement echoed around the table as the officers nodded, determined to defend their lines against the looming threat. Commander Kurosawa Nariki tapped his staff against the floor, calling the room to order. To guard against a sudden strike by the hidden mist village, we're adjusting several team assignments. Here's the new deployment. Nathan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He'd known he'd be up first. Nariki met his gaze. "Joan and Nathan, you and your squad are to reinforce Eagle's Beak Cliff. The stronghold there is critical and must be held at all costs." Eagle's Beak Cliff stronghold marked the northernmost bastion of the defense line. A jagged spur of the continental shelf, it thrust into the sea like a giant eagle's beak, hence the name. Expose, D on 3 sides, it was notoriously hard to defend. Just last season, and the one before, the hidden mist village had exploited that very weakness to shatter our northern defenses. Nathan straightened. He understood the gravity of the assignment, but he also knew Commander Nariki wasn't punishing him or settling old scores. If anyone could hold that precarious outpost, it was Nathan and his team. With a steady breath, he steeled himself for the challenge ahead. Nathan had a different plan. Rather than lead the charge, he intended to station his own squad at the sector of the defense line that had already been breached twice. If it fell a third time, Kurosawa Chengshu would be in serious trouble with the Anbu. In their ranks, the saying went, "Once is an accident, twice a coincidence, but a third time is a pattern." Let the hidden mist village force break through the same point 3 times in a row, and Chengshu's competence would be called into question by the higher-ups. Nathan didn't argue. He was supremely confident in his skills. Even if the stronghold were lost, he knew he wouldn't die. What sealed the deal was Chengshu's promise to reinforce Nathan's position with 3 full squads, over 50 additional ninja, alongside Nathan's own men and the existing defenders inside the fort. In all, more than 200 shinobi would hold that sector, a concentration of forces unmatched anywhere else along the northern defense line. From Kurosawa Chengshu's worried expression, it was clear he still feared the hidden mist village might push through this pass again. Nathan shook his head, rejecting the thought. As soon as the meeting ended, he issued orders without delay. He and his men, reinforced by the 3 detachments Chengshu had provided, would make a forced march straight to the northernmost Eagle's Beak Cliff and hold the line. That night, under a bright moon and a scattering of stars, Nathan's column moved swiftly. By midnight, they reached the cliff's foot, and the sight of the fortress still standing unblemished brought a quiet relief. He had braced himself for bloodshed, envisioning Kirigakure's shinobi already in control and a battle erupting the moment they arrived. But now it seemed his worries had been premature. Word had it that the Mist Village patrols had only begun probing these routes today. An immediate assault was out of the question. Even though they'd breached these defenses twice before, they wouldn't dare be so reckless again, especially knowing Chengshu could pour more troops into this sector at any time. Nathan took a steadying breath. Tonight, at least, Eagle's Beak Cliff remained theirs. He had no illusions about tomorrow, but for now, he would make sure this stronghold stayed intact, and that any would-be invaders thought twice before testing it again. Nathan understood why no one was willing to take unnecessary risks. If this was a trap, they'd be in serious trouble. Yet the terrain here gave any attacker a decisive advantage, so the hidden Mist Village would almost certainly press on, at least with further reconnaissance. That was precisely why Lord Kurosawa had assigned Nathan to this post, to keep a sharp eye on every movement. Thud, 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 a rhythmic series of footsteps echoed through the camp. At the front gate, a dozen shinobi from the Hidden Leaf emerged, led by a seasoned jonin. Their sudden appearance set the guards on edge, but thanks to Kurosawa's prior warning, the stationed troops managed to contain their alarm. Within minutes, credentials were exchanged, identities were confirmed, and command of the outpost shifted smoothly to Nathan. Despite the gravity of his new authority, Nathan felt no excitement in administration. He delegated all base affairs to Uchiha Tihuo, then returned to his quarters to resume the grueling training he had abandoned earlier that day. Managing people might be important, but for Nathan, nothing matched the tangible progress of honing his own skills.